He'd arrived back to find the battle done. The Vale knights and lords had surrendered, and Jon Arryn was now their prisoner. It left him feeling incredibly proud. They had done what they'd been asked to do, and done so without a huge loss of life. Their own side has suffered few casualties, less than 500 men injured and less than 100 dead. The Vale's losses were much larger, almost 2,000 dead, less than half that to Dragonfire, and another 2,000 or so injured. All in all, they'd accepted the surrender of almost 14,000 men, knights, lords, and plain soldiers, all needing to be marshaled. That alone would provide a problem, and was one he knew would require a lot of thought. So to say he was relieved when Gerion arrived would be an understatement. To see his uncle safe and well remove that little bit of doubt and worry that had been growing in the pit of his stomach. "Nephew," Gerion said as he rode towards him. Tyrion, standing with Lygaron and stroking the dragon's neck. "It's good to see you safe and well, uncle," he said with a smile. "Aye, you too, Tyrion. It's done?" Gerion asked, and he nodded. "We won, aye. Jon Arryn is our prisoner among many others. Apparently, the Honorable Falcon tried to kill Ned Stark after surrendering," Tyrion said, and saw Gerion scowl. That man's claims of honor were always lies. Gerion said, and Tyrion nodded, looking to Cregan and Dusk, who were watching on. "Tully was nowhere to be seen, Uncle. I'm sorry." "Tully is dead. His men have surrendered. The Vale and Riverland's army are beaten, as are the Stormlords. The rest is up to our king now," Gerion said. "Poor." "Dead? How?" "The floppy fish couldn't swim, Tyrion," was all Gerion said, and Tyrion thought he'd best leave it at that for now. "Any word from Jon?" "No, not yet. I'd not worry, though, had something happened or were I needed. Then Lygaron would let me know. Come, I'm sure you could eat, and the Northern Lords will be happy to hear your news," he said, turning to Lygaron and watching as the dragon took to the air, no doubt off to find some food of his own. He spoke briefly to Cregan when they walked. The young man had seen little action which Tyrion felt thankful for. Let him keep his innocence a little longer, he thought. Behind them, Sir Richard and Sir Jorah walked, and when they got near the camp itself, Satin came running over. His squire, very happy to see one of his friends, was unharmed, and Tyrion allowed him and Cregan to go off and speak together. As they entered the large tent, he saw Gerion look to the bird in the cage behind Ned Stark, a guilty look on his face. "Uncle?" he asked softly. "Jaehaerys asked me to bring the damn bird with me. I was so keen to go after Tully I didn't," Gerion said, Tyrion once again noticing the different way he'd said his nephew's name. It took some getting used to when it was just them. Most of them thought of him still as Jon. In public, they called him Your Grace, and when he wished it Jay or Jaehaerys, and he knew his nephew had as much trouble with it as the rest of them did. He was about to say something when the Greatjon looked up to see him and Gerion, the man's booming voice soon announcing their arrival. "A prince and a lion. We are truly blessed this day," the Greatjon said, only to quieten when Lya, Ned's wolf, got up and ran from the room, Tyrion chuckling at the look on the man's face. "One of her pups has returned," Tyrion said, and heard the Greatjon mumble about wolves being the death of him. "Lord Gerion, it's good to see you well," Ned Stark said. "You too, Lord Stark. My nephew was just telling me the extent of your victory here. It puts mine own to shade," Gerion said with a smirk. "Well, we are of the North, Lord Gerion. We're used to putting Southerners in the shade," Maisie said proudly. "My good niece will be so happy, my lady. Lady Dacey is never slow in showing any who doubt it, the fierceness of the North, and of those born on Bear Island in particular," Gerion said, and they saw the little curl of the lip the she-bear gave them both. "Riverrun fell without incident, my lord?" Lord Demeric asked. "It did, Lord Bolton, though its inhabitants had fled before then. one of whom I've been lucky enough to catch up with. Well, lucky for me that was, not so much for him." Geryon said to laughs. Tyrion looked to see the worried look appear on Ned Stark's face. While he may have set Catelyn Tully aside and wished to deal with her no more, the woman was still the mother of his children, and so Tyrion nudged Geryon, who noticed it then also. "Lord Edmure tried to run, my lords. He wasn't quick enough, and fell into the water and drowned." Geryon said to more laughs and a relived exhale of breath by Ned. Tyrion, though, knew his uncle far too well to believe this was the truth of the tale. His men, Howland, Reed, asked, his eyes keener than most, and Tyrion felt he knew his uncle had not told the truth too. "Have surrendered, Lord Reed. The war in the Riverlands is over. I believe our king may send for us if we're needed elsewhere." They ended up talking over themselves, some wishing to march to the king, others to King's Landing, some worrying about the prisoners they had and what to do with them. Nothing, in the end, was resolved, and Tyrion felt more and more like getting on Lygeron's back and flying to where his nephew was, 2 dragons being better than 1. It was the Crannogman, though, who ended all thoughts of doing anything else but waiting for word. "Our king knows where we are, given what we all know he's capable of. I believe, as Lord Geryon said, that if we're needed, he'll send for us," Lord Reed said. And despite the man's diminutive stature, his words seemed to carry weight, Tyrion feeling a little envious of that. They changed their armor, and he now wore more comfortable clothing. While they didn't feast that night, they ate and drank, and he enjoyed himself. The Umbers were fun to be around, large, loud, and perhaps a touch mad, but he enjoyed listening to them. Geryon seemed more himself also, his uncle laughing and japing with Lady Mage, the Manderleys, and, surprisingly, Lord Bolton. The only man who didn't seem to be having fun was Ned Stark. Tyrion learned from Satin that Robb Stark had taken a nasty fall, and though not seriously hurt, it had clearly worried his father. But, though he believed it was the man's former wife who preyed mostly on his mind, as in a way she did his own, where Catelyn Tully was he didn't know. That she was with Littlefinger he'd asked Geryon to keep to himself. No point worrying Ned even more than he already was. He slept peacefully that night, though his dreams were anything but. Her face, her smile, her body was all he could think of. When he woke the next morning, he found himself ever more eager for this war to end, wondering how quickly they could be wed and what it would be like to live in Dorne. It was thoughts like this that distracted him most of the day. That, and for the next few days, he spent his time trying to figure out how to move the prisoners, or what force to leave guarding them. It was while trying to do this in his tent that he heard the news, Satin rushing in to tell him, "My lord, riders from the king." Satin said to him excitedly, "Fetch my uncle Satin," he said. And Satin nodded. Walking with his Kingsguard, he found the riders at Ned's tent, the rest of the northern lords soon rushing to join them, and Tyrion looking to see the man in front ask for him, Ned quickly pointing him out. "My prince, I bring word from the king," the man said, handing him the letter. Tyrion smiling to see it was in Jaime's writing and bore the seal of the hand of the king on it. He broke it open, read it, and then handed it to Ned, all of the gathered lords looking to their own liege for the news, though it would have to be Tyrion who explained it. Tyrion, having forgotten just how close Ned had once been to Robert and what his death would mean to him, had expected him to do so. "My lords, please, let's go inside and I'll speak on what my nephew has written," he said. And it was the large gray wolf and not his words or any to Ned that brought the man inside the tent. Once they were all there, and with Ned Stark still looking lost, Tyrion decided to get this over with as soon as he could. "Robert Baratheon is dead, my lords," he said to cheers and some gasps, Ned doing neither. Our king, faced with the prospect of a battle, offered to allow it to be settled the old way, for them to face each other and for the gods to judge the right of it, he said, adding the last part himself. Looking around the tent, he saw the nods and proud looks. Lord Reed, Lady Mage, the Manderleys, and the Umbers, even Lord Bolton all seemed happy. This was how things had been settled. after beating Robert. He said, as if there had been any doubt he would. Robert asked him to end him clean, but our king refused, having Sir Arthur kill him in his name instead. Looking to see some nodding of heads, cursed is the kinslayer. Howland said proudly to more nods. Aye, that's the truth of it, Lord Reed. It seems, though, that the Golden Company didn't live up to the terms, that Robert wasn't their king, and it was a Blackfire they truly supported. Tyrion said to angry shouts about dishonor and fucking Blackfries, holding his hand up as he had seen his nephew do. He was surprised how quickly things grew quiet. Our king offered the Blackfire the same challenge. He said to Cheers, though this one was refused. Bloody coward. Umber shouted, a smart one. Only a fool would take on our king with a sword in his hand. Lord Demeric said to more cheers. The Blackfire also broke parley and tried to assassinate our king, though on that he failed also. He said to angry shouts, we march. We'll gut these golden fuckers and put them to the sword. The Small John shouted, my mace has never tasted bitter steel. Meg said to Laps, we have no need to march, my lords, my ladies. Our king and his army have already put the Golden Company to the sword. King Jaehaerys answered them with fire and blood, and the Golden Company is no more. Those who survived are to take the Black, and the Night's Watch is to be better manned than ever before. He said to Cheers, and then a jape from the Great John. The king's just as greedy as those fucking wolves. I'd have loved to take out some Golden Company men. An umber against an elephant. Now that's a tale worthy of song, the Great John said, laughing loudly. We marched to King's Landing, my lords, to see our king crowned, the king from the north. He said using their words rather than his own. His nephew was as much from the west now anyway. He found him later that night, Ned Stark standing silently as he looked out on the emptiness of the Trident, his wolf beside him. I'm sorry for your loss, Ned, he said softly. Hey! He was my brother once. I'd not thought to find a truer one, Ned said, his voice cracking. He was never made to be king. That throne needs someone stronger, truer. He said and saw the man nod. I'm glad Jaehaerys didn't do it himself. I love my nephew truly. It's taken me a long time to realize how to show it. But despite it all had he, I fear I'd blame him, that I'd fall back where I once was. I almost picked Robert over him. No, I did, I believe. I fear I'd have done so again, Ned said. No, Ned, you wouldn't, he said, and saw the nod as he left the man alone, his words not enough to comfort him. Maybe no one's would be. The Stormlands, 298 AC, Oberyn. They had begun their march, heading towards King's Landing, though Quentyn and most of the army assumed they were heading to the Riverlands. Oberyn asked his daughters to move amongst their men. Their eyes and ears would be invaluable, and even though his nephew believed him to be on his side, he was being remarkably tight-lipped about his plans. Were it anyone other than Jaehaerys he was moving against, then Oberyn would have been proud of the boy. But he'd tested his nephew more than once, asked questions, played along with them, and even though he was doing his father's bidding, there was more to his dislike of Jay than simply that. It took him a while to figure it out, more because he was concentrating on deciding who he could and couldn't trust than anything else. Doran wished Arianne on the throne, and Quentyn would then become Prince of Dorne, both his nephew and Anders Ironwood finally getting their wishes. Each night when they set up their tents, he'd sit with men he didn't know if he could trust, lords who he wasn't sure whether they followed him or Doran. Yarnwood he already knew. Jaime said the Black Moss could be trusted as there was no love between them and Anders or Quentyn. House Dane he knew was Jay's, as were the Storm Lords. Looking out as they ate, he saw Nymeria sitting with the Fowler men. His daughter was very close to Franklin's girls, and the old hawk was quite fond of her. Obara sat with the Corgyle men, Oberyn laughing as she said something to Lord Quentyn. Obara, my prince doesn't seem as happy as he normally is. Who is it that vexes the Viper so? Harmon asked Ilaria's father, another he could trust completely. I fear not all our friends feel the same way about our king, Harmon, he said softly, and saw his paramour's father's eyes quickly move over the tent. Anders his first look, and then surprisingly, Weil his second. I am aware of some. Is there more than I think, my prince? Harmon asked. I do not know, not for certain. Keep your eyes open and ears pricked. I'd not expect any to come to you, but men are foolish, he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. They are indeed, my prince. Ilaria and my granddaughters are aware of this possibility? Harmon asked. They are, he said. Then I'm sure they and Ulwick have taken the necessary precautions. Come, drink. There are still friends amongst us, Harmon said with a chuckle. And those who aren't will soon realize the true recklessness of their mistake. By the time they reached the Kingswood, he was almost certain. Fowler, Dane, Uller, Blackmont, Corgoyle. He had a little over half the men under him, while Quentin could call for the other half. With the Stormlords, though, he could add almost another, almost 4,000. Numbers he had. But he'd not wished to see Dornishmen fall because their lords and their prince were fools. Oberyn planned to take Quentin, Weil, and Euronwood. Take their lords, their knights, and their heirs. He just needed the perfect time to do so. When they reached Haystack Hall, the Castellans sent out men for a parley, fearing they'd come to sack it. Oberyn would have laughed if it were not for how his nephew responded. Quentin, threatening the man and not just upsetting the Stormlords who were with him, but some of their own men also. What were you thinking? We aren't here to sack castles, nor to threaten them. The war in the Stormlands is done. We ride on and leave those who forsworn to raise their arms in peace. He shouted at him in their tent that night. These are conquered men, uncle. Dorne has put them to the sword and beaten them. They need to know their place, his nephew said with a sneer. Dorne hasn't beaten them. I've beaten them. I've offered terms and you'd make me a liar. Do so again, nephew. Believe me, you don't want to incur my displeasure any more than you already have. Forgive me, uncle, Quentin said, though there was no sincerity in his words or tone. In the end, though it was fortuitous, as it revealed another knife that could be held at his back, Nymeria stunned to see Franklin speaking to Quentin and Anders. His smiling face and words, she heard enough to prove him false. Weddings. He'd sell us out for weddings, she said angrily in his tent that night. It is the way of the world. Cletus would rise high, and Quentin would be a huge match for Franklin. But, he said, Jenelyn and Jane would eat those little boys up and spit them both out. Also, I thought Uncle Doran wished a princess for his prince, Nym said, and Oberyn smirked. Arianne had told Tyene about Quentin's failed trip east, and what one of his daughters knew, they all did. No doubt he still does. I'd not trust a word my brother says. His words and promises mean nothing, Oberyn said, the bitterness in his voice picked up on by his daughters, and Tyene sat down beside him and leaned in close. How many do you think, father? How many would we need to subdue to have our men be trustworthy? Obara asked. He sighed as he began to work it out. Anders, Cletus, Archibald, Garrus, Quentin himself, Franklin, and half a dozen of his knights, Weil, and more than 10 of his. All in all, perhaps 50 men would do it, though how to get them all together would be a problem. No more than 50, though truth be told, we could perhaps do it with 10. He said and saw Obara smile. We should take them, tonight or tomorrow, his oldest daughter said, and he shook his head. We're still unaware of their plans. March to the Golden Company and join them. But what else? What plans do they have for the dragons? He asked his girls only for them to shake their head. The chirping of the bird, though, drew his attention. We keep working. I'll speak to Quentin and see if he'll give me more. If not, we plan to take them. Be careful, my children. We will, father, Nym said, and Oberyn smiled when Tiene kissed his cheek. His youngest girls were still overly affectionate, and while Nim and Obara, his oldest especially, were reticent in their affections, Tyene was at heart still a little girl. When he was sure they had left and were out of earshot, he moved to the cage, looking down to see the bird's head tilted his way. "You are in there, nephew?" he asked and smiled when the bird chirped. "I almost have it all. We march to King's Landing, as you wished. I'll see you there," he asked, and the bird cawed, shaking its head. "I'll see you before?" The chirp rang out, and Oberyn smiled once more. He looked forward to seeing Jay again. That he was coming to him had to be good news, he hoped. It was a day and a half later when he arrived. They were marching through the Kingswood, when suddenly they stopped, men and horses panicking, as if they were under attack. Beside him, Obara readied her spear, and Beric and Lord Selwyn, along with Harmon, looked to him for guidance. Only Thoros didn't seem concerned, the priest pointing up to the sky. "Our king arrives," Thoros said with a grin. "By the gods, is that a dragon?" Selwyn asked, though who the question was directed at was anyone's guess. Oberyn and his girls all looked up. Rhaenys looked magnificent. When she flew over them, the sheer size and majesty of her almost brought a tear to his eye. No, this was not the life he wished for his niece. She should have been dancing and fending off suitors. Rhaenys and his girls should have been closer than sisters, her smile allowed to brighten up a room while men and women alike gazed at her in appreciation and envy. That life had been stolen from her, this one all that remained, and yet she would always be looked at with awe and wonder now. Her beauty was different, but just as potent, just as true, and no one would ever be able to harm her again. He heard the riders coming towards him, and it took him from his thoughts. Rhaenys had disappeared from their view, no doubt having found somewhere to land, and Oberyn looked to see Quentyn and his companions with worried expressions on their faces. Cletus's one would be perfectly matched by his father wherever he was. "Was that the king's dragon?" Quentyn asked, and Obara broke into laughter. "No, cousin, that's just another random dragon. They're everywhere now, don't you know?" Nymeria said as Quentyn glared at her. "Why is he here, uncle?" Quentyn asked, his worry even more clear. "Let's go ask him, shall we? I'm sure you fine men would all like to meet a dragon after all. What's the worst that could happen?" he said, seeing both Garrus and Archibald gulp. Beric, Ned Dane, and Thoros asked to join him, while Selwyn and Tristan shook their heads, Oberyn smiling at their nervousness. They were allies. They had nothing to fear from his niece and nephew, which was more than could be said about the others riding with them. Quentyn and his men whimpered constantly as they rode, and soon they reached the clearing. Rhaenys' head snapping around quickly to look at them, the look in her eyes, one he knew all too well. Tread carefully, or you'll end up bitten. Jay was with two of his Kingsguard, Sir Walder with axe in hand, and Sir Arthur with dawn out, both of them putting their weapons away when his nephew signaled for them to do so. He found himself studying his nephew. The armor he wore was incredible, the black plate reflecting the light and allowing the swirls to identify it as Valyrian steel. On his hip he wore the thin sword, its ruby hilt and flamed pommel, letting every swordsman know which blade it was. Dismounting, he moved towards him, and as one they took a knee. "Your Grace," he said, looking to his nephew. "Rise, uncle," Jay said, and as he did so he was caught in a hug. Kingly. It may not have been, but he welcomed it all the same. "Lord Beric, Lord Dane, and Thoros, I believe you know," Oberyn said, and Jay nodded, greeting each of them, Ned Dane smiling at something he said softly to him. "Lord Harmon Uller, Illaria's father," he said warmly. "Lord Uller, an honor. I've been most fortunate to have met Lady Ilaria when she accompanied Prince Oberyn. As with the prince himself, she is someone I'm most grateful to call family, and someone who honors me by doing likewise."
"She is a remarkable woman, my lord. It is a pleasure to meet her father, truly."
Jay said, and Oberyn didn't need to look to see the smile on Harmon's face. You honor me greatly, Your Grace, Harmon said. Cousins, Jay said, his smile true as he greeted each of his girls. Chiene, chuckling at something, he whispered, Sir Gareth Drinkwater, Sir Cletus Urienwood, Sir Archibald Urienwood, Sir William Wells, Your Grace. Good sirs, Your Grace. And finally, your other cousin, my brother's son, Prince Quentin Martell, he said, and turned to see the false smile on Quentin's face, Oberyn looking closely at Jay, whose own seemed on the surface to be far more true. Cousin, it's so good to finally meet you. You too, Your Grace, Quentin said in reply. I very much look forward to meeting you and your brother, as well as your father for some time. I've been lucky enough to meet Princess Ariane. Perhaps later, once I've settled, we can speak together? J.A. asked, sounding eager, but not angry. I'd like that, Your Grace. Good. We should head back to the others. No doubt they fear my dragon has eaten you all. Jade Japet, and then as if on cue, Rhaenys roared before she took to the sky. Hungry though she is, it's different meat she craves. Oberyn looked at him as they walked. Jay, nodding to him, and he wondered if he had a plan and hadn't just come to see him, though he welcomed that also. Dragonstone, 298 AC, Zanny. They had sailed past Tyrosh and onto Cape Wrath, Davos taking her in a small boat to land close to his home, the night allowing her and Shiera to spend time with the dragons, while he and his son went to speak to his family. Were it anyone else but Sir Davos, she'd have refused, worried that word of her arrival would get out before she was on friendly ground. Davos, though, had given her his word, and Shireen and Selyse had backed him up as honest and true. That Sandor and then later Melisandre did likewise only reinforced how right she was to accept it. While Davos walked off and left them alone on the cliffs, Dany waited with Shiera for her children to come to her. She'd been with them briefly in Tyrosh, flown with them over the water, and though she had loved it, it felt like an age and more than the few days it had truly been since she'd touched them and felt them lean against her. Shireen had asked to come to see them, and on Tyrosh she'd allowed it, but here in this place, she would not. Even Missy and Melisandre were left on the ships, Dany coming to the shore with Sandor, Belwas, and some of the company that she'd been given as her guards, Roderick seeming happy to be in Westeros once more. Seeing the dragons, she smiled. Even Sandoric seemed happier than he had been, her wild son even more eager to fly west than Elegon or Rhaegal were. Ixan olvi biare najot, andigon aunu harinar. I'm so happy to see you, my children, she said softly when she moved to Elegon and Sandorix, hearing Shiera tell Rhaegal how much she'd missed him too. Moving quickly, she hurried up Elegon's wing. She was excited to be in the air once more and to see some of the land she'd been born in. Sovegan Elegon. Fly Elegon. The dragons took to the air, and she flew into the stormlands themselves. Below them, they passed two keeps, one larger, which she assumed was Rainhouse, based on what Davos had said about his own being, more modest, across Shipbreaker Bay. And soon they were flying high over Storm's End, the keep that belonged to the usurper's family. Shiera had told her more about House Baratheon than she had ever known, and it only made their betrayal hurt that much more. Orys had been Aegon's closest friend. Shiera had told her that he was in truth his bastard brother, kin to the Conqueror and the founder of the Stag's House. They had then picked Aegon over Rhaenyra, despite the fact that Rhaenys was their kin, and she herself had picked the Blacks over the Greens. Lord Lionel had fought for Duncan the Tall, and though he'd rebelled when Prince Duncan married another rather than his daughter, their houses were soon joined once more. It made Robert's grandmother her twice great aunt, and yet had, in the end, it had counted for nothing. Ambition, desire, and the whispered words of their enemies had been enough to sway a house that should be their lealest. Though again, it had been Shiera who told her the truth of that too. House Valerian is the only house we can ever trust completely. Princess, the old, the brave, the true. No house is more leal and worthy than they. As Elegon headed back for the shore, she looked forward to meeting them, to know there was one house she'd never have to fear. That she and her nephew could always rely on was something she was most grateful for. They may have dragons once more, and the idea of going against them now was not something that most would think of. Still, men were men, and oaths were fickle in Westeros, it seemed to her. Knowing one house would always stand next to theirs was a boon she'd see rewarded. Chikagan, Iperdagan, Nikalindagan Au Adera, Lun Ribalinton, Nuharinar, Adera, Lunosagon Lintor, Auhon Sinuhon, Auhon Sinuhon. Go, eat. I'll see you soon. We're almost home, my children. Soon we'll be with more family, yours and mine, she said as Elegon trilled as she looked at her, Sandorix letting out a noise to show he was happy too. Sir Davos arrived back not long after the dragons had taken to the sky. The war in the Stormlands was over. The Dornish army had been victorious and had since moved on. The knight seemed happy that his lord was still alive and being held as a prisoner rather than having been executed, and Dany knew that would please Shireen when he told her. She wondered, though, if her nephew was planning to kill him after the war, or was he being too soft to enemies of their house? Would it not be best to kill him? She asked Sandor and Shiera that night. There are other ways, Dany. He could sentence him to take the black, could hold a trial, he could even pardon him, Shiera said. And Sandor snorted. He'll not pardon him, he may not kill him, but he'll not fucking pardon him, Sandor said. Why not kill him? She asked curiously. It serves no purpose. Stannis was stuck behind his walls in the rebellion. He never got the chance to raise arms against your father or brother. He declared for his own, but he never got the chance to march. He was still a traitor, she said angrily. But by that token, so was any who marched, Dally. But if you don't blame the ones that raised their blades, then you can't blame those who did not, Shiera said. Who says I don't blame them all? She said, and Sandor smirked. I may hate most of the fuckers, but you can't remove them all. Your nephew is riding with Lannisters, Starks. Do we blame Jaime Lannister for what Tywin did? What my brother did, Sandor asked. She knew he'd taken it badly when he's heard of his brother's death. Not the loss of the man, but he'd been wrought when Melisandre had told him. While he'd welcomed the man who'd killed him had reason, something Dany agreed completely with, thinking if anyone had the right, then a Martell did. Sandor had been angered that it had not been him. As for the Lannisters, Dany was unsure what to think. Viserys had said that Jaime Lannister killed her father. No one denied it, yet he by all accounts was her nephew's lealest man. Dany knew what her father was like. Sandor had told her many times during their earliest time together, yet he was her father still, and she'd need to look Jaime Lannister in the eye to see if he was true. The more she thought about it, the more she felt the need to speak to her nephew. Her understanding of things was clouded by distance and lack of context. She only hoped he'd be able to offer her the reassurance she needed. Not just about this, but about himself too. Melisandre said he was good, and Sandor, Davos, Shireen all spoke of him as being of sound mind. But was he truly? Viserys had seemed so once, and even at his worst he could seem so to others. Could Jaehaerys be the same? Dany, Shiera said a little louder. And Dany shook her head, once again lost in thoughts and worries. I'm sorry. I was thinking of our nephew. Our nephew. Worrying that we may be too late, or he may not be what we wish. Charmed, she said, her voice full of concern. I believe we've arrived in time, Dany. Melisandre, the dragons, they don't seem concerned. As for the other, we'll know the truth soon, and should he not be then, we'll worry about that, together. Shiera said, smiling at her. And Dany nodded. We could always just send him after him, Sandor said, pointing to Strong Belwas, the man sleeping while sitting up, an empty plate in front of him, and the sauce or gravy of whatever he'd eaten was still on his face. Despite her concerns, she found herself laughing. Sandor smirking too as he looked to Shiera, and when she went to bed that night, it was with fewer worries than she had earlier. It took them another 2 days to arrive at Dragonstone, Danny standing up on deck and staring at the island from the moment it came into view. The Dragonmont was alive with the sounds of her children as they flew and circled the giant volcano. It felt like an eternity until she saw the docks, the ships bearing the sigil of her house proudly, along with others of the lords of the narrow sea, the seahorse of House Valerian being the most prominent of the others, though there were some she didn't recognize amongst them also. That there was no place for them to dock was frustrating. But soon Davos was beside them in the boats. All of them were quickly made ready to land, and other than the sailors and some men to guard the payment she'd received in Mir, there'd be few staying on board. Stepping off the boat and onto the sands was like nothing she'd imagined. True, she'd pictured herself coming home many times, but she'd no true idea of what home would look like. No real image of it in her head, and the books didn't do it justice. She moved across the sand and then knelt down, tears in her eyes as she took sand in her hands and let it slide through her fingers. When she heard the Unsullied standing to attention and felt Sandor and Belwas by her side, she looked to see men approaching. One of them was silver-haired and dressed in black. Briefly, she thought he was her nephew and felt her heart race in her chest, only to remember that Jaehaerys was dark-haired, and so she now wondered who this man was. Princess Daenerys, Princess Shiera, welcome to Dragonstone, the silver-haired man said, seeming to know them both. Forgive me, my lord, she said. No, Lord Princess, Aurene Waters, brother to Lord Montfort Valerian, and a leal supporter of our king and his family, Aurene said with a smile. She offered him her hand, and he kissed it, and then did the same to Shiera's. Danny, catching the look, he shot Sandor and then Sir Davos. My nephew, she asked, is busy winning this war, princess. Perhaps you'd prefer to have this discussion in the keep rather than on the beach. No doubt you'd wish to see your family home once more. Aurene said only for Sandor to move forward. The princess will move to the keep once we're assured of her safety. Danny looked as Aurene got an angry look on his face, something which concerned her until she saw it more clearly. It was more than simply anger. It was as if the words Sandor had said were an insult. The man was affronted, and she knew why that was. House Valerian is and has always been our truest supporters. I'm sure we'll be safe under their protection. I personally guarantee it, Princess. Our loyalty to House Targaryen is beyond question. He said, and she smiled at him, seeing him relax, as if to emphasize how little danger they were truly in. Elegon, Rhaegal, and Sandorix landed, and Danny looked to see Aurene smile and show no concern. Instead, he looked at the 3 dragons with a smile on his face, and her children paid him no mind at all. "You've seen dragons before?" she asked as they walked to the keep, the long, winding pathway annoying her as it seemed she was no closer to her home than when she had begun to walk it. "I have Princess, His Grace's dragons, Lygaron and Rhaenix." Lygaron. She asked a second name, seeming an easier one for her to understand. For the family, he lost Princess. His mother was Lyanna, your brother, his father Rhaegar, and his brother Aegon, Aurene said, and Danny nodded. I had thought Rhaenix was named for my brother, just as I had named Rhaegal for him, she said. And Aurene shook his head. For his sister, Rhaenys. She smiled at that, knowing for some reason that this was her nephew's own dragon, just as Elegon's was hers. When she finally reached the great doors of the keep, she took a step forward and walked inside, looking to see banners bearing the 3-headed dragon and portraits of members of her family hanging on the wall. She heard Davos and Shireen saying that this place had changed from behind her. Aurene then left them to arrange rooms for them, and Danny felt herself drawn forward, Shiera and Sandor quickly walking with her as she strolled the halls until she reached a door and walked inside. The room was large, and as she moved to the bed she began to cry. Here, this was where she had been born, where her mother had lost her life. She felt herself being held and looked to see her aunt allowing her to cry against her chest. Sandor moving to the door to give them privacy, while Shiera whispered words over and over again in her ear. She'd have wanted you to live, Dany. More than her own life, your mother would have wished her daughter to live. Now seeing you here, seeing what you become, your mother would be proud of you, so very proud, and I promise, if someone asked her to make a choice, you'd still be the choice she made. Shiera said, and she somehow felt her aunt was right. Later that night they ate, and after they had done so, Orain brought them into the chamber of the painted table. Dany looking down on the map that Aegon had made of the 7 kingdoms he'd intended to conquer. She looked to Orain, eager to hear about how her nephew's own conquering was going on. As you are aware, the Dornish army led by Prince Oberyn defeated the Stormlords and captured Stannis Baratheon. The rest of the Stormlords took up the offer. The prince made them and retreated to their keeps to sit out the war. In the Riverlands, an army led by Garyon Lannister and joined by loyal houses took Riverrun and defeated House Tully and those sworn to them. The Tullys fought against the Starks, Sandor asked. You've been away a long time, Clegane. Lord Stark set aside Catelyn Tully after she, Littlefinger, and her brother tried to have the king killed twice, Orain said, before turning to her reassuringly. They failed. Obviously, Princess, and the king was unharmed. She felt her anger once again. Even here, people still sent assassins after her family. Lord Stark in the north allied with Prince Tyrion and some lords of the west, faced and defeated Lord Arryn and the Knights of the Vale. Lord Arryn is their prisoner, Orain said, and Dany smiled. Her half-brother, no brother, he'd be her brother if he wished it so. He'd, too, played his part in returning their family to their throne, and she felt a sense of pride at that. My brother rode his dragon? She asked, and Orain nodded. Dany smirking and feeling a little jealous, too. Our nephew? Shiera asked. The king and Lord Jaime marched to face Robert, who had the Golden Company with him. Orain said, and Dany felt her nerves rise. His Grace offered Robert single combat to decide the war, which he accepted, and after he beat him, he then had Sir Arthur take his head. The usurper is dead. The war is over, she asked happily, only for Orain to shake his head. It seems that Robert wasn't the reason the Golden Company had come. They instead were backed by a magister from Pentos and a boy claiming to be Prince Aegon. Illyrio. He was part of this. She knew he'd wished to place Viserys on the throne, but it seems the fat man was running a different game, that he was involved with the Mummer and with John Connington. John Connington is with this boy? Shiera asked as Dany was about to. He is. The king offered him the same terms. They were refused, and during the parley, they tried to kill him. Again, Princess, the king is safe, unharmed. As for the Golden Company, well, they woke the dragon, Orain said, smirking. What happened? She asked. Orain told her what her nephew had done. Fire and blood had been brought to the Golden Company, and this pretender, now all that remained was King's Landing. The war was almost over, it seemed, and she felt happy it was, though she was more than eager to see her nephew and her brother. Where is my nephew now? My brother? She asked. They head for King's Landing, Princess. All the armies are converging on the capital. Good. Then so shall we. Sandor, you, Belwas, and the company of the Rose's men will sail with Sir Davos to land as close to King's Landing as you can. On the morrow, my aunt and I fly to meet with our family, she said, standing up and walking from the room, eager for the night to be over and the dawn to break. Tomorrow she'd see her family for the first time, and she felt her heart race at the thought. But Kingswood, 298 AC. J. Harris Targaryen. He tried to rein in his temper as his cousin spoke, Quentin offering platitudes and asking questions at the same time. Jay sensing his eagerness about the Golden Company and his plans to beat them, and thanking the gods that his cousin's network seemed to be as lacking as his uncle's had been. After arranging to have a meeting in an hour, Jay first asked to speak to some of the other lords that had joined Oberyn. Soon he was speaking to Stormlords and Dornishmen, and watching as Oberyn or his cousins subtly nodded or winked at who could or couldn't be trusted. Speaking briefly to Oberyn and hating the mummery he was about to do, he entered the command tent and ready to make plans for a battle that had already been won. The map that lay in front of him was of the Crown Lands and Riverlands, and Jay was moving pieces around showing where armies were and were not, all in an effort to paint as big a target on his back as he could possibly show. Once it was ready, he began to lay out the role he wished the Dornishmen to play. The Golden Company marches to face Lord Jaime's army, here. He pointed on the map. I had hoped my Uncle Eddard would have finished with his own battle, but I've received no word and fear he's bogged down. While I'd have liked to go to him, I needs must win this battle, or we are lost, he said, shaking his head worriedly. What is it you wish of us, your grace? Oberyn asked. Jay laid out the plan. The Dornish army was to swoop in once Jaime and his men were engaged against the Golden Company, their arrival turning the course of the battle their way. He told them he couldn't use the dragons because of how it would be perceived, and saw Quentyn smirk when he said that. He did promise to use them to force the army against them where they wished them, and saw some nervous looks on Lord Weil and Lord Yarnwood's faces. So there you have it, my lords. We march on the morrow, he said, and saw them nod. Lying to the Storm Lords was not what he wished to do, but he meted them all outed, and the target he gave them would be one too tempting to resist. He'd left his flanks open. If they arrived and came at him from the side, instead of at the Golden Company, it'd be a massacre. Of course, there being no actual battle to take part in would mean there would not. Still, for a chance to knife him in the back, they'd never get a better one. So that night, as Oberyn was called away, Jay had the Stormlords brought to him, along with Blackmont, Corgyle, Dane, and Uller and his cousins. Forgive me, my lords, and allow me to apologize for the mummery earlier on. It was required to root out some traitors, he said to loud groans which he hushed. What you're about to see may seem strange, but bear with me. He took out the glass candle, seeing the excited look on Thoros' face. It had hurt to take Marjorie's one away, but he had no choice. He needed to see, to show. Placing the black one on the table, he took the green, and then with his knife cut his hand. The scar on his left hand rarely healed much now. So often did he cut there. Letting the blood drip on the candle, he closed his eyes and heard the gasps as people saw the image. The tent where Quentyn was laying out his plans, finally informing them of Highgarden and of how they intended to use Marjorie, the army that would take her long before they needed to act. His cousin insisted as they all looked on. Prince Oberyn would never, your grace. Harmon. Ulla said once the images had stopped and the extent of the treason was clear. My uncle is not involved, Lord Uller. I'm well aware of his loyalty and his own plans to root these treasons out. Things moved quickly after that. He arranged the men and then reached out to Rhaenys, the dragon flying quickly to where they were. Soon they surrounded Quentyn's tent, and at a roar from his sister, the men came running outside. Drop your weapons or face a dragon? The choice is yours, he said, looking to each of them, most of them doing as he said. One of them did not, though. The man was large and bald and held a huge warhammer in his hand as he ran toward him, shouting, For Dorne, the man shouted, and those were the last words he'd ever speak. Arthur removing Dawn from his back was quick. Rhaenys was quicker. She didn't burn him. No flames came from her mouth at all. At all. Instead, she grabbed him with her talons, and within a few flaps of her wings, she was in the air, and the hammer fell to the ground with a loud thump. All of them watched as she threw him high and then caught him in her mouth, the explosion of blood and guts spreading and covering those unlucky enough to be directly below. Anyone else wish to try their luck? He asked with a smirk. Lord Yronwood, Lord Weil, Lord Fowler, tell your men to stand down in your treason, and the consequences of it stays yours and yours alone. Refuse, and when I leave here it'll be to your keeps. I fly, and I'll not return until they're destroyed, and you are the last of your line. Then and only then will I take your heads, Jay said, and within moments the men were speaking to each of their men. Thoros, see that my cousin is well guarded, Stormlanders only, he said as Thoros moved to grab Quentin, Oberyn looking at him, and Jay shaking his head. The rest of you will face sentence on the morrow, he said, turning and walking away, Arthur and Walder behind him. When he reached the tent, he waited, and Oberyn and his daughters soon arrived, Jay bidding them sit while he readied to tell his tale. King Robert is dead, the Golden Company no more. My uncles Ned and Tyrion have defeated the Knights of the Vale, and Jon Arryn is their prisoner. Edmure Tully is dead, and yet one more enemy remains. You lied, Nymeria said with a smirk. I had to. I needed them to show their hand. I know you've been working on rooting them out, Uncle, but I needed to do so more quickly. I must fly to King's Landing and make ready to deal with the mummer within. But before that, I have more troubling news that I need to share. Oberyn asked, and Jay nodded. He sent an army to take Highgarden, where he intended to take Marjorie prisoner to be used to bring me low. You know what he planned here, and what deal he'd made. Arianne, she's safe and unharmed, by the way. He said to stop the question that was coming. She tried to take him, but he had prepared for it, and when I arrived, she was being chased through the desert by her father's men. Sir Daemon and Sir Andre dealt with her. What happened? Oberyn asked. I played a mummery, Uncle, just like here. I allowed him to think he had won before we took the Water Gardens. He confirmed it all, and one more thing, Sir Garrison Fowler, he said softly. Hey! He killed him, Oberyn said, realization dawning on his face. He did, Sir Garrison was, who Elia spoke of in her letter, the love she'd lost and whom she had planned to spend her life with if things had not gone so wrong, he said, closing his eyes for a moment and then continuing. I ordered him to be sent to Gaston Grey, Uncle. It must be seen that he pays for his treason. In a few moons' time, he can be moved to more comfortable but still secure surroundings. Dross quote, You didn't take his head? Obara asked, and Jay shook his own. I thank you, nephew. I'd not see it done if it was anyone other than my brother. But I thank you for that, Oberyn said. Quentin? Taine asked. Will take the black. Arianne already pled with me and will no doubt do so again, but exile cannot be enough. Not just for the treason to me, he seeks and will continue to seek to usurp his sister and speak to Sir Garrus and Sir Cletus. Ask them truly how far they were willing to go if your father had resisted. They would have killed him, Obara said angrily. They would have tried, Jay said to smirks and a wink from Oberyn. The others? Oberyn asked. Will lose their heads or take the black. They'll get no other choice. All of them? Obara asked, her voice shocked. The lords and knights directly involved. How many do you count, Uncle? Not more than 50. The men just follow orders, and I know how this leaves Dorne. I wish there was another way, but maybe it's for the best. When Tyrion and Arianne are married, they'll at least know those she rules over will be leal. He asked for a moment alone with his uncle, and when his cousins left, he turned to him. Oberyn looked tired, though whether it was physical or emotional, he couldn't be certain. I am sorry, Uncle, truly. I wanted them to be family, like you and Ilaria, he said, and Oberyn smiled at him. You, Arianne, Trystane, my girls, my niece, and my future grandnieces and nephews are family, Jay. I'm comforted by that, Oberyn said. I need you with me in King's Landing, Uncle. When I take my throne, I need your counsel and advice. I'd name you to my council if you'd accept any role your wish. He asked nervously. I've always wanted to be in charge of laws, nephew. Let's bring ones to bear that better this realm. Let's do that. Oberyn Martell, Master of Laws. "It has a good ring to it," he said, smiling, "as does King J. Harris, the third of his name. Now I intend to get very drunk, nephew. I hope you're willing to sing. I'm in need of good cheer this night, and I've heard tell of many new songs," Oberyn said, slapping him on the back as he left the tent. Unsurprisingly, none of the lords, knights, and closest of their men involved in the plot against him decided their heads to be worth more than their lives. He could only imagine what Jorah Mormont would think when he heard not just the number of men, but the quality of them that would soon be arriving. Jay, smiling as he thought about the ones soon to join him, his uncles, the Loyalists, a promise he was glad to be able to keep. "I'll see you in a few days, Uncle," he said as Rhaenys said her goodbyes to his cousins. "You will die in tales of wars. Be safe. Let's end this war and move forward, all of us." "Aye, we will." Rhaenys took to the air, and before he knew it, he was flying high over King's Landing itself, a part of him wishing to just land and take the Red Keep. To see the Mummer's Dragon and Fat Cheesemonger brought low, and yet he could not, something forcing him to fly past. Soon enough, he saw the lion banners and flew low so they could see him, before flying further north and seeing the wolf ones too. He had only taken one pass when he heard his son call out, and so he circled and waited and found himself laughing when Tyrion hurried to Lygeron's side. His son, almost leaving him behind, so eager was he to get into the air. He flew beside them, and Jay could see Tyrion's expression, relief, questioning, and a small amount of worry that he hoped he ended with a laugh. Directing him to follow, they flew back to Jaime and the rest of their army, landing and listening as the dragons spoke to each other. "We got your letter. It's done?" Tyrion asked. "Not quite. One more fight to come, Uncle. Then it's done. Come. I'm sure your brother will be happy to see you, just like Rhaenys is to see her own," he said, and Tyrion shook his head at the way the dragons were behaving, playful and friendly, and yet to anyone watching that knew no better, terrifying. King's Landing 1 week later. Jaime. They hard marched, and then waited for the Northern Army, and Tyrion and Gyrion's forces. Now they were less than a day away for King's Landing. For Jaime, having Tyrion, Gerion, and Jay all safe and nearby had relieved him greatly. Even hearing of his brother and uncle's victories hadn't removed his worries for them, and so seeing them, speaking to them, had been incredibly important. As for Jay, after hearing about events in Dorne and with his cousin in the Stormlands, he was just happy that his king was back amongst people he could trust completely. When the Dornish army arrived today or tomorrow, they would surround King's Landing and make it clear to those inside just how hopeless their situation was. Jaime had been surprised when Jay had told him that the fat cheesemonger and the mummer pretending to be his brother had gone to King's Landing, surprised even more when he told him that they now somehow controlled the city. "Renly? A prisoner," Jay said. "What forces do they have? Surely not enough to hold the city?" he asked, and Jay shook his head. "No. They may have the gold cloaks, though, and I've seen men on the walls that look SOC. Unsullied?" he asked, and Jay shook his head. "No, thank the gods. Sellswords, I think. There's something. I feel something's off. I'm missing something," Jay said. Whatever it was, he hadn't been able to figure it out either. None of them had. It made no sense. At most, they had 5.00 men. That's if they had landed sellswords, which Lord Montfort and Richard both agreed they had not. So in truth, they had half that, between them all here alone. Jay would have almost 60,000. Some had been left to guard prisoners, and to begin to march them to the wall. They could send almost 10,000 men to each of the 7 gates to overwhelm the defenders and take the city quickly. With Rhaenys and Lygeron, they could take the gates themselves, burn them down with limited damage, and make taking them even easier. The fat cheesemonger knew they had a dragon, though not that they had 2. Surely he'd have seen there was no way he could win. If anything, his retreat should have taken him to Essos. It made no sense, and so just like Jay, he was feeling there was something wrong, and just like Jay, he couldn't think what it was. "His Grace requests your presence," Tommen said to him, Jaime smiling at his nephew as he got up from his seat. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting, should we, nephew? He said, and Tommen nodded. His nephew had taken to squiring well, and though he and Jay hadn't had much time together, when they were, he could see how Tommen's eyes would light up. His lessons always that much happier when they were given to him by Jay. They walked to the king's tent, something that he and Jay had disagreed on, but was needed. The large tent was twice the size of his own, not that his was small either. He had told him that it needed to look the part, that it was where meetings with lords had to take place, and as the king from now on his world revolved around image as much as it did practicalities. As he entered the tent, he saw he was the first one to arrive. Jay was sitting down in the corner with his eyes closed, opening them once he entered. "Find anything out?" he asked. "No. Other than the sellswords, who are even less than we thought, 500 or so only. The Windblown, led by someone called the Tattered Prince," Jay said. "Can he be turned? Bought?" "I don't know, but I doubt he knows about the dragons." Soon enough the rest arrived. Tyrion and Gerion, Ned Stark and the Northern Lords, the Lords of the West and Riverlands, Lord Montfort and Sir Richard, and the Reach Lords, Tarly, Rowan, and Ashford. After having wine given to those who wished it and food to any of the others, Jay bid them look at the map of King's Landing. The forces inside the city I doubt have any true idea of the numbers assembled against them, my lords. I intend to show them those numbers. When we reach the city, I wish our forces to split, Lord Tarly. Lord Rowan, take your men to the Gate of the Gods. Lord Stark, yours to the Dragon and the Old Gates. Lord Gerion, the Lion's Gate is yours. Prince Tyrion will join Lord Jaime at the Mud Gate, and I'll join with Prince Oberyn and his army at the Iron Gate. The Red Keep is our main objective, my lords. Diverting their men to each of the gates will allow us to reach it easiest. Once the Mud Gate and Iron Gate have fallen, then diversion is no longer necessary, and unless you can take the other gates without heavy loss, I'd ask you to divert to those two." "The dragons, your grace?" Lord Stark asked. "To use them in the city is to invite disaster, my lord. Grainix and Lygeron under me and my uncle's direction can be made to direct their flames, but in the city itself, the risk to innocence is far too high. I intend to use the dragons to take the two gates, the Mud Gate and Iron Gate, give the shortest access to the Red Keep. Maegor's is formidable if correctly protected, and there again the dragons will be used, a warning rather than a direct assault, though." Jay said to Nods. "A sound plan, your grace," Jaime said, showing them all he agreed with it. "Let's hope so, Lord Hand." Jay said, "Prince Oberyn should arrive later today, and tomorrow we'll parley. Illyrio and the Mummer will be given one chance to leave. After that, each of you knows what you must do." "Parley, your grace, after what happened at the God's Eye, is that wise?" Lord Crakehall asked. "Roland not one to mince words. No, it may not be, my lord, but it needs to be done all the same. I doubt they'd try the same thing twice after it failed, and I won't be parleying alone. Rhaenix will be by my side, and trust me, my lord, no one is more invested in my safety than she." Jay said, looking to see Roland nod. "My lords, you have your orders. I'd ask you to see to your men and make ready." It was a dismissal in all but name, and when Ned and Tyrion began to move, Jay held up his hand and bid them stay. Gerion, Sir Richard and himself also along with Arthur and Walder, also not allowed to leave. Jaime looked on as Jay sat down, his king looking tired and worried, and it took him a few moments to speak. "I've spoken to Lord Jaime about this and hope to consult the glass candles on the morrow, when they're able to be used once more. There is something more going on here, something I've not been able to ascertain, and it vexes me, given the odds they face. Illyrio and this false Aegon of his should have run further. I'd have expected them to be on a ship to Essos by now, rather than here, and that they are, worries me. You think they have some cunning plan, some trick or hidden ally?" Tyrion asked, and Jay shook his head. "They have something, uncle. What it is, though, I do not know. Tomorrow, when the order comes to attack, I ask you to be even warier than you normally would be. Tyrion and I will be on our dragons, you'll be on the ground, and I'd see you as well prepared as possible, even if I know not what it is you're preparing for. We'll take care of your grace. I'll speak to my lords and ladies and let them know. Ned said, and Jay nodded. Aye. Dusk will be with me, my king. If there is anything to worry about, then I'm sure the wolves will know. Jerian said. Just be careful, all of you, Jay said, and it wasn't the king who spoke then. Instead, it was the boy who cared and worried about them who had made that simple request. We will, your grace, he said, and Jay nodded. Richard said he'd see if he could find out anything from his lips, and after everyone left, Jay turned to him and Arthur. Tomorrow I want each of the Kingsguard to be with my family, Sir Arthur. You alongside Sir Jaime, Sir Walder with my uncle Ned, Sir Jorah with Geryon, and Sir Richard with Prince Oberyn. You'll be on the dragon for all of it, my king? Arthur asked. Neither myself nor Tyrion will land unless it's beside a Kingsguard. I give you my word on this. Tomorrow we stay in the air until the fight is done. I'll see the others have their orders, Arthur said, turning to move. Arthur, you be careful also, Jay said, and Arthur smiled. You too, your grace. Arthur left them both alone, Jay looking up to him with a small smile on his face, which Jaime returned, the tiredness and weary look he'd had on his face seeming to be gone now. Cheer up, Jay. Soon you and Marjorie will be married, and then your real troubles will begin. He japed. Do you miss her, Jaime Dacey, here now? Do you miss her? Every day, her and Joanna, but I'll see them soon, he said, and Jay nodded. I look forward to it, them. Joy, Jenna, all of them. It feels like forever since I've seen them guys. I even find myself ready to move at story time some nights. Jay chuckled. I'm sure my cousin will welcome its return. How many girls will be able to say in the future they had tales told to them each night by a king? Jaime asked, and Jay smiled broadly. Aye. Go get some rest, Jaime. I'll see if I can find anything else before I sleep myself. I'll see you on the morrow. Aye. Make sure you sleep too, Jay. Tomorrow will be a long day. He bid him good night and found himself unable to rest, walking the camp before he finally went to his bed that night, his mind worried, and like Jay, he couldn't tell why. King's Landing, 28 AC, Illyrio. Word came to him of the army that surrounded them, and even though he knew it was coming, the sheer size of it rattled him. Watching as they spread around the city, he wondered how he had ever thought he could beat them with just the Golden Company. Quickly, though, it hit him when he saw the White Dragon. That had never been his plan. Aegon would have brought all these men together under his banner if it wasn't for Jaehaerys Targaryen. He wondered, had Varys known? Had he tried to do something about it and been found out? It seemed likely, and was only another reason to hate the boy outside the gates even more. Walking from the walls, he reached the bottom and sent the men out to organize the parley before he headed back to the Red Keep. Illyrio had only made it halfway before the tattered prince caught up with him. The sellsword obviously not happy with what he had seen. You never said anything about a dragon, the tattered prince said. I'll deal with the dragon and his rider, he said. And the huge fucking army, who's dealing with that? The army won't be a problem, trust me. Your ships are ready, are they not? They are, fine. I'll wait for the parley, but that army attacks and my men aren't standing against it. Illyrio, we're gone. He nodded, and then continued on his way, speaking to Sewer Rat when he saw him, the Unsullied telling him he'd done as he'd asked, and his men stood ready. When he reached the Red Keep, he heard even better news. The bountiful harvest had docked in the bay, and so he sent word to allow Affadar to land. The siege they'd soon find themselves in, getting yet another way to resolve itself. He found Aegon in the throne room, his son wearing black armor that, while it wasn't as impressive as the Targaryens, looked so much more regal on his son. Your bastard brother has come, your grace. He requests a parley, he said with a bow. Mo, does he? Lord Han, the surprise is ready, Aegon asked. It is, is. Also, my man has arrived back from Bravos. He brings word from the faceless men. Forgive me for overstepping your grace, but I gave permission for him to land, he said, and Aegon nodded. That's quite all right, Lord Hand. I leave such trivial matters for you to handle, Aegon said, and though he smiled at him, inwardly he grimaced. If the boy had been entitled before then, ever since he'd sat the throne, it had become worse. He cursed John Connington as they rode to meet the false king, bemoaned that he'd not curtailed these impulses in Aegon. Worse, he'd kept them from him, and so he'd been unaware of them. Had he not been then, he could have asked Halden, Duck, the scepter, or even sent someone more suitable to keep them in check. Now it was too late. As they rode out, he looked to the group ahead of him. The dour-looking man with the wolf sigil had to be a Stark, something which Aegon seemed to notice. The others were mainly lions, giving their golden hair and green eyes. He recognized the striding huntsman of House Tarly and the golden tree of House Rowan, though it was the bright red sun and golden spear of House Martell that grabbed his and Aegon's attention. "My uncle is here?" Aegon asked, a smile on his face. "It seems so, Your Grace," Illyrio said. He'd received a reply from Doran accepting his offer, but no word since, and he smirked. The snake at the dragon's back was a welcome piece of good news. Though seeing Prince Oberyn's face as he looked at Aegon, he wasn't quite sure. Either Oberyn was the best mummer ever, or there was hatred in his eyes, the latter seeming more likely when Aegon spoke to the Red Viper. "Uncle, for so many years I've longed to see you, to explain the reasons why I could not would take more time than we have right now. Perhaps once this false king has knelt and been dealt with, we could speak?" Aegon asked. "Ah, you're right, nephew. He really is a fool. My sister would never choose a son over a daughter, one child over another. There is nothing in this world that could make her do so," Oberyn said angrily. "Princess Elia saved her heir. Aegon is—" Illyrio said, only for the dragon to interrupt. "Dead. My uncle speaks true. Any man who knew Princess Elia would know the truth of this, so enough of this mummery. Despite the advice of my council and my own feelings, I'm willing to make you one final offer. Go. Leave. Take your ships and sail back to Essos. I'll not follow. I'll not seek you out. I give you my word on that. Stay here, and that job someone did on his face," he said, pointing to Aegon. "I'll see it taken to its natural end. Trust me, my dragon won't let him off so easily." Illyrio heard the dragon roar, and then it landed close to them, Aegon looking both fearfully and avariciously at it. "No," he said, and looked directly into the king's eyes, smiling as he did so. "You've developed quite a reputation in a short time, Jaehaerys. But one of the problems with a reputation is it allows people to know what you love, what you care for, and what you'll do to protect that you are attached to." He watched, as despite trying to school his face, the king looked at him, a glimmer of doubt in his eyes being enough to make Illyrio smile. "You, Varys, told me why you killed the Mad King, what he planned to do to the city, and why people called you Kingslayer. For 5 and 10 years it's lain there and no one ever bothered to look for it, remove it, and had they then I'd not be able to do this." He raised his hand, and the cage was then dragged out. "What the hell are you doing?" Jaehaerys asked. "You have until tomorrow to surrender and accept Aegon as your king. After that, every hour until you do, this will happen." He raised his hand up, and the green liquid was thrown over the man, woman, and children in the cage. The small family he'd had dragged from Flea Bottom, a mother, father, and their 3 children, screamed, and then the world went green. Jaehaerys almost jumped from his saddle to get to him. Behind him, Dragon roared even louder. Illyrio welcomed the tears that were in the boy's eyes. He'd given them food, a better life, both in King's Landing and in the north. Coin he'd won in tourneys. Coin from the Tyrells. Both Jaehaerys and the Golden Rose had cared for these wretches, and that was his biggest flaw. To care left you weak. Honor left you weak. And looking at him now, he could see that the boy was indeed as weak as the rest of the false dragon. Their line never had the true strength required to rule. His did. If you attack, then my men already have orders to ignite the wildfire. Tell me, Lord Jaime, do you truly know how much the Mad King had of it, or where it is? Even if you did, do you believe you can get to it all? You have a day, Your Grace, he said with contempt as he turned to ride back. Excellent work, Lord Hand, Aegon said, slowing down as they rode by the cage, Illyrio almost gagging at the stench of burned flesh while Aegon looked fascinated by it. They had just reached the gate when he heard the roars of the dragons. Dragons! More than one. He looked up to see 3 dragons fly over his head, 2 with riders on their back, their silver hair marking them clearly as the Targaryens they were. Hurrying back to the Red Keep, he then had to spend almost an hour trying to calm Aegon down, needing once again to have Halden bring him some of his concoction. His son threatening to show them all what a true dragon can do, though what he threatened to do to Daenerys was much viler. A Fodra has arrived, Magister. He awaits you in the royal apartments, Duck said. Very well, see that Aegon rests, Duck. With any luck, this will all be over on the morrow. You think they'll accept? Duck asked. The boy will, and if not, Afadar may provide us with a different solution, he said with a smile. Should they attack? Then they'll find surprises on their routes, and before we leave this city it will burn, he said, walking away. Thuarad had moved some of the wildfire and lined the route from each of the gates to the Red Keep. If the army breached, then they would set it alight, and while it would destroy some of the city, the biggest casualties would be the armies that marched. As he walked to his room, he felt on the verge. All his plans, all his schemes, all his gold had led him to this point. In one more day, his son would be declared the one true king, and Illyrio will have kept his promise to her. Entering the room, he saw his servant and moved to the table, eager to hear his news. Ah, Afodar. I trust all went well, he said, sitting down and asking for food to be brought. It did, Magister. The faceless men were very accommodating, Afodar said, and declined when the food was brought. Not that he really cared, alone or in company. Illyrio always ensured he'd enjoy his meal. So they will send someone? He asked as he held the roast partridge in his hand, the juices rolling down his fingers. They already have, Magister, Afodar said, smiling. He felt it then. The blade, at first like a pinprick, and then quickly becoming more. The partridge quickly falling to the floor, and Illyrio trying to scream through the hand that covered his mouth. The face that had once been Afodar's was gone, and he looked to see a thin, gaunt woman with large, dark eyes looking at him. The real truth of what faceless men were now finally becoming clear to him. Not that he'd ever be able to tell anyone that truth. He felt her, him, whatever it was moving behind him, the knife now at his throat. Valar Morghulis. The faceless man said, and as the knife slit his throat, the unintelligible gurgle, had it been more clear, would have said but one word. Sarah. Sira. They had left Dragonstone that morning. Dany feeling nervous and excited. If all went well in a few hours, she'd be meeting more of her family. As she flew on Elegon, she wondered what they would be like. Would her brother be as happy to see her as she was him? Was her nephew who everyone said he was? And what exactly did a prophesied prince look like? She had learned a lot more from Moraine about both her brother and her nephew. Tyrion was smart, funny, and betrothed to the Princess of Dorne. His dragon Lygaron was a bright bronze, and he loved his family. Jaehaerys was her age, and Moraine seemed to almost worship him and the things he had done. The way he'd speak about him was as if he was some legend come to life. Dany found it funny. Her nephew had learned one lesson, it seemed. Their family needed to be seen as more than. Despite the many things she disagreed with Viserys about, that one thing had stuck with her. From the moment their family was considered the same as everyone else, people then had no qualms about replacing them. For almost 300 years, no one had dared, other than other members of their own family, but once they saw them as no better than any other, then they had moved. True, there were many other reasons behind the rebellion, as she'd come to find out, but that was one of them, and it was one they need to be wary of in the future. Blackwater Bay. She heard Sierra call out as her aunt pointed down below them. Seeing it in front of her, a part of her wished to land and walk the halls of the Red Keep, to stand in the throne room, and to finally see the iron throne that Aegon had forged. Yet it was on and past the Red Keep they flew. Sierra pointed ahead, and Dany looked to see green flames in the sky, a chill going down her spine, knowing what they were. She urged Elegon to fly faster, and as they flew over the gates she saw men entering, and then the green flames still burning something some distance away. Then she heard the excited sounds coming from Elegon, Rhaegal, and Sandorix. Looking ahead, she could see why. The white dragon was huge, far bigger than any of her children. It was also different, and Dany couldn't see why for a moment until she finally saw it, when the dragon stood up. It had 4 legs, and its wings seemed to come out from its back. Was that how it was so much larger, she wondered? A little way off, she could see a group of men, one wearing golden armor, and one in the most incredible black armor she'd ever seen. Was this her nephew? If so, where was her brother? She flew past them and heard Elegon's excitement once more. There ahead of them was another dragon, this one bronze, and she smiled, knowing now her brother was here also. Once again, though she was surprised by how much larger the dragon was than her own. Had they hatched earlier, or did her nephew know more about dragons than she did? She let the thoughts fade for now and turned to fly back to where her nephew was. Tegan Elegon. Land Elegon, she said, and her dragon did what she asked, landing a little distance away from the white dragon and much closer to the men. She had barely had time to climb down when they were in front of her. The man in the golden armor she knew now had to be Jaime Lannister, his blonde hair and green eyes making him a very handsome man. There were 2 men wearing white cloaks standing behind the man she was sure now was her nephew, for surely these men could only be Kingsguard. As for her nephew, he was exactly how Kinvara had described him. His long, dark, almost black hair hung loose, and his dark gray eyes stared at her. Dany was surprised to see there were tears there, and even more surprised a moment later when she was embraced. She'd not even seen him move, and now she was being held in strong arms and was holding him back. When he let her go, she looked into his eyes, seeing there were indeed tears there, but there was something else too. He looked happy, joyful even to see her. "Aunt." "Dany," she said with a soft smile. "Dany, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," he said. And she looked at him confused. "Jaehaerys? Viserys, I should have you, I wasted so much time, I'm sorry." "Oh, my sweet nephew, I'm here now and we have all the time in the world," she said, hugging him back and feeling his tears on her neck. "Come, your other aunt would no doubt wish to greet you also." He looked at her and smiled, and it was like he was a different person when he did so. Jaehaerys' reaction to her seemed a little off, though, and she wondered if it had anything to do with the green flames, resolving to ask him about it as soon as she could. Dany looked on as he greeted Sierra just as warmly before he then introduced her to the rest of those that were with him. Jaime Lannister, Sir Walder Elliers, and Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. Finding herself looking to the man, who was her brother's best friend, with excitement, and thinking of the stories he could tell her, she took her nephew's offered arm and they walked to the camp. Dany, looking to see the dragons, seemed to be getting to moving to each other, and Jaehaerys catching her worried expression. "Relax, Dany. Rhaenys, and they are dragons. They're family just as we are," Jaehaerys said. "Is Tyrion nearby, Jaehaerys?" she asked at the mention of family. He said, and she nodded. "He is, eager to meet your brother, Dany." "My brother, not my uncle," she said with a smirk. "What?" he asked, confused. In your letter, you said we had another uncle. Tyrion is your uncle, Jay, not mine, she said with a giggle. He laughed loudly, and then she did too, the look on his face one of both embarrassment and mirth. Gods, I was so nervous when I wrote that. I'm surprised that's all I got wrong. It is, isn't it? He asked, and she put her finger to her lip as if she was in deep thought. Danny? He said, and she laughed again, happy to see him laugh with her once more. Whatever sadness or emotion he was feeling when he met her seemed different now. It was more one she'd like him to have. As they walked, he spoke to them both, telling them little of the war or what they'd flown into, but more of their uncle at the wall and of Tyrion and their dragons. He even told them he was to be married soon, that he had hoped they'd have arrived in time for the wedding and how glad he was they did so. Reaching the largest tent, he asked to be left alone with them and sent someone to find Tyrion, though in the end, he hadn't needed to, as almost as soon as they sat down her brother arrived. Dany stood up and looked at him. He was a dwarf, as she'd been told, and was dressed in similar armor to her nephews, the three-headed dragon displayed clearly. Uncle, may I present our aunts, Daenerys Stormborn and Shiera Seastar of the House Targaryen? Jay said, making it clear that Shiera was just as much family as she was. Princess Daenerys. Tyrion stuttered. It's Dany, your sister. It's good to finally meet you, brother, she said, kneeling down to hug him. You too, Dany, sister, Tyrion said, hugging her back. They sat and talked for some time, both Tyrion and Jay eager to ask her about her life in Essos and about Shiera and how she managed to actually be alive. She laughed at the easy way Jay and Tyrion spoke to each other and how they japed at each other's expense, each of them bringing both she and Shiera into the conversation to take sides. Through it all, though she couldn't get rid of the sense that her nephew is putting on an act, though not one to deceive more, to deflect, and she felt the need to know why. What's going on, Jay? Truly, don't get me wrong. I'm glad of the welcome, and I wish nothing more than to get to know you both, but it feels as if I've interrupted something. Something you're glad I've interrupted? She asked. She looked to see her nephew sigh, and looked to Tyrion before he closed his eyes and opened them before looking to her. What know you of the war, Dany? Jay asked. Dany told him all that Orain had told her, noticing the way her nephew tensed when she got to Illyrio and the Mummer Dragon. Before you arrived, we parleyed with who I would have hoped was Renly Baratheon, though I knew coming here it was Illyrio and this boy who claims to be my brother. Jay's voice sounding bitter at the mention of both of them. It seems they've taken the city, though they don't have the forces to hold it. But they have wildfire, don't they? Shiera said. And Jay nodded. They dragged the cage out. There was a family inside, the children, gods, the children were so young, Jay said, taking a swallow before he continued. They burned them, right in front of me. They burned them with wildfire, and now they threaten to do the same to more each hour I don't surrender. You can't, Tyrion said, and she saw the angry expression that appeared on Jay's face, one which at first took her aback until she realized that, unlike with Viserys, this anger wasn't aimed at anyone who didn't deserve it or underserved. Of course our bloody can't, but what am I supposed to do? He'll burn them in front of me, and if I attack the city Tyrion, Aerys wished to blow it all to the seven hells. If I attack, I risk that. I can't, not just because of the people inside, but anyone I send in I risk losing also. What do you intend to do? What do you intend to do? She asked. I have no idea, her nephew said, his voice broken and the look on his face seeming lost. The tunnels, Jaehaerys, Brynden and I would explore them when we were children. Maegor had them built and the builders executed, but Brynden was ever curious, and before I left we'd mapped them out, Shiera said. I know the tunnels, but I need to know the warnings he's put in place. If he can get the word out before we take him, then being inside the Red Keep won't matter. The city and the people will burn anyway, Jay said. She looked at her nephew, who seemed to be thinking of something, and at her brother, who she found looking at her. Maybe we should give you some time to think, Jay. Tyrion, can you introduce me to your dragon and maybe come and meet Elegon? She asked, and Tyrion smiled as he nodded. I'd like that, Dany. She stood up, but Shiera stayed sitting, her aunt looking to her as if to say she'd be staying here a bit longer. Dany nodded to her and turned to leave, telling her nephew that she'd speak to him later, and then walking from the tent with Tyrion. Soon enough, they were standing in front of Ligeron, and Dany noticed the saddle on the dragon's back, looking at it eagerly. Did Jay have that made? She asked. No, Rhaenys brought it back from Valyria, Tyrion said, shocking her. Rhaenys brought it back herself. How does a dragon know to do such a thing? Rhaenys is different, come. We've much to speak on, and I'd like to get to know my sister better, Tyrion said warmly. As I would my brother, she said, following as he led her away. King's Landing, 298 AC. Jaehaerys Targaryen. His mind was in turmoil. One part of him wanted to tear Illyrio and his false Aegon to pieces with his bare hands. Another wanted to give up and surrender to them so no one else would be hurt. He'd almost jumped from his horse to get at them, the image of fear and hopelessness in the eyes of that poor family as they were dragged out, stuck now in his mind. As was the image and sounds of their terror as the green flames were set alight. There were almost 500,000 people in King's Landing, and Jay had no doubt that Illyrio and Aegon would see them all burn. Had he not seen the dragons in the sky, then he had no idea what he would have done, but they and his aunts had arrived at exactly the right time. The resolve which he had already felt slackening was firm once more, and as he hugged and then spoke to Dany and Shiera, he knew what he had to do. Then, though Shiera gave him an option he had not thought fully about, one he was now considering. What are you thinking, nephew? Shiera asked as he sat there silently. I need to know where it is, the wildfire, what his plan is. But before that, there is something I can do, I think so anyway. First, though, I need to do something else, he said as he got up and walked to the chest, reaching in and taking out the glass candles. You found them, Shiera said with a smile. Our Uncle Aemon is the maester at the wall. Actually, he's not. Your uncle, is he? He asked, shaking his head at the thought. He's my nephew, just like you are, Shiera said. I'd dearly love to know your story, Aunt. I'm sure it's a tale worthy of the ages. I'd be most pleased to tell you. You know how to work them? She asked. Aye, blood is the key. I've seen the past, the present, and used them to speak to people great distances away,
he said, thinking of Marjorie and despite everything, smiling a little. I've even seen the future.
Briefly. Briefly. The future is fickle, Jaehaerys. Unwritten and unknown and ever-changing, what you see is not set in stone. I know. I saw my wife die. I was able to change it, he said, looking at her and watching for her reaction. Good. Should you see it again, don't let it define your actions. Jaehaerys, I've seen what happens when you do. Shiera's voice almost cracking as she spoke, and then looked to the ground. Bloodraven, he said, and her head snapped up as she stared at him. My brother was a dangerous man, Jaehaerys, and what he saw changed him. I know all about Bloodraven, Aunt. No, Jaehaerys, you do not, she said forebodingly. He was about to ask her to explain when Jaime and Oberyn walked into the tent with Richard, the men looking from him to his aunt. Lord Jaime, Prince Oberyn, Sir Richard, my aunt was telling me about the tunnels. Can you ask Sir Arthur to join us? He said, looking to Jaime, who called Arthur inside. I'm aware of the tunnels, Your Grace, though I believe Varys may have been the only man who truly knew them. Richard said, Not the only one, Shiera said. Balerion knew them even better, I believe, than Varys did. For more than 10 years he roamed them. He explored every nook and cranny, and what he knows, I know, Jay said, both Richard and Shiera looking at him, his aunt confusedly. My sister's cat, Aunt, not the dragon, Jay said, smiling. You're a warg, she asked, and he nodded. Aye, I am. They were soon joined by Arthur, and after they had taken their seats, Jay cut his hand once more, allowing some of the blood to pool before smearing it on the 2 candles. His aunt watched closely as he did it, Jay wondering if she and Bloodraven had done the same, or did they know something he did not. Now, though, wasn't the time to find out, and so holding the green candle, he looked into the black one and went looking for the locations of the wildfire. By the time he'd finished, he was as shocked as everyone else. Things were much worse than even they had feared. The wildfire under the city would only need one man to set it off, a single order, and it would be done. That, though, could perhaps be taken care of. If he could sneak enough men into the city, they could kill or subdue those closest to each of the caches, or at least make it so that each would need to be set off individually. The bigger problem was the men guarding the routes from the gates, unsullied, and they'd not be easy to take. Not only could no army march until they'd been dealt with, but to subdue even 2 or 3 unsullied would be incredibly difficult, nigh on impossible to do so before one of them completed their orders. Jay looked at the amount of wildfire the unsullied guarded. While nowhere near the size of the large caches, it would be devastating to the city if it was set off. If their forces marched, he'd lose his army. Countless men and women in the city would die too, not that they'd be marching now. He picked up the other candle and looked at the Red Keep itself. There were gold cloaks, a couple of unsullied and sellswords, and a man who kept very close to Aegon. Illyrio walked with 2 guards, and yet the keep was poorly defended. They could take it. All they needed to do was to get inside. Closing his eyes, he let the images fade and turned to look at the others in the tent, Richard speaking first. The Red Keep is takeable, Your Grace. It could be done so with less than half a dozen men if we can get them inside. Aye, but we need to secure the wildfire first, he said. 6 separate areas spread out across the city. Even with the tunnels, it would take us hours to get there and to see it done. But they're poorly guarded, and though the guards are close to the wildfire, it can be done, Arthur said, leaving the unsullied. Oberyn said, and Jay nodded. We can't beat them, not quickly enough. Even were we able to smuggle archers inside, one of them would make it and set it off before we could beat them all. He said, There is another way, Jay Harris. Where is my niece? Shiera asked as he looked to her. She and Tyrion are with the dragons, Jaime said. Send for her. Dany will help with the unsullied. Shiera said, and Jay looked at her before nodding, Arthur stepping outside to send Walder and Brienne to bring his aunt back. And Jay asked after a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, each of the men in the tent trying to come up with some plan to free the city. When we were in Essos, we met with a girl who had run from her master. He sent some unsullied to capture her, and Dany turned them to our side. The leader of them, Grey Worm, was well respected amongst the others. He may have trained with them. Even if he had not, he may be able to convince them to join us, Shiera said. You think this will work, Princess? Richard asked as Jay was sitting there trying to imagine just exactly what his aunts had gone through while in exile in Essos. Dany has a way about her. She and Grey Worm will convince them, Shiera said. What? No. She can't go into the city. I'll not allow it, he said, his voice almost panicked. Allow what, nephew? Dany said as she and Tyrion walked into the tent. Leave us, all of you, Tyrion. You and Dany stay, Shiera said, and looked at him when he went to argue, Jay quickly nodding to Jaime and the others and then waiting for them to leave. I'm not sending my aunt into that city. It's bad enough I have to go. Should anything happen to me then, she's the heir to the Iron Throne. The last hope of our family lives in this bloody tent. I'm not risking any more of it than I have to, Jay said firmly once they were alone. It's not your choice to make, nephew. Trust me, I know my niece, and she'll not accept anyone telling her what she can and cannot do, but please feel free to try, Shiera said, smirking. Try? Send me into the city? Just what exactly have I missed? Dany asked. Shiera explained while he paced, Jay, more worried than angry. Looking at both his aunts, he could already see what Shiera had said was true. There'd be no talking his aunt out of this now. I need to fly to Dragonstone. I should have had Grey Worm come with the others, Danny said, standing up. Others? He asked. Sandor, Strong Belwas, and some men of the Company of the Rose are being brought here by Sir Davos. They should be landing close by, Danny said, and Jay just looked at her, confused. You can use them, nephew. Sir Davos knows how to sneak into a city by sea better than any man out there. He single-handedly saved Stannis Baratheon and Storm's End. He can get you into the city, all of you, Tyrion said. Gods, this is what it's come to. Very well, do it. I'll speak to the others. Tyrion have men sent to bring Sir Davos and the rest of my aunt's men here. Danny, you should go now. We'll want to do this as soon as it's dark, he said, and Danny nodded before turning to walk from the tent. Once she had gone, the others quickly walked in, Oberyn and Jaime noticing he was distressed, but Jay waving off any concerns for now. After they sat, he began to lay out the plan, leading, of course, to more and more arguments. We should land near the cliffs. I believe there's an entrance there, Oberyn said. We? Jay asked. You think I'm letting you do this alone, Your Grace? I'll not try to talk you out of going into the city, but you won't stop me or my girls going with you. Oberyn, he said angrily. No, nephew, we end this together. No one will do a better job one-on-one than your cousins, and my spear will guard your back along with Sir Arthur's blade. He's right, Your Grace. I'll lead the men into the tunnels while you move to the Red Keep with Arthur and Oberyn, Jaime said. By the gods, I'm surrounded by the most stubborn, he sighed. I don't want more people I care about at risk. I'd go in alone rather than that. He stopped and stood silently for a moment. Jay, Tyrion asked. There is another way. I think. He sat down and closed his eyes, finding the rat and making it run through the gaps in the wall. Jay, he heard a voice, but he was moving through the Tower of the Hand, and finally he found him, Illyrio walking from the tower and heading to the Red Keep, his guards beside him. Jay. He couldn't find a door, though. None. It was like looking at an unbroken wall, moving down, touching the stone, and finding that no matter how far you went, there was no door, there was no way in. And so he moved from trying to enter and back to the rat. When he went looking for Aegon, he felt himself almost collapse against the desk, his eyes opening and the blood coming from his nose. Water and a cloth. He said, seeing the relief on the faces of those around him when he drank the water and wiped his nose. What did you do? Shiera asked curiously, though not reproachfully. There was enough of the latter in both Oberyn and Jaime's eyes, Richard, Arthur, and Tyrion looking more worried than upset. I tried to ward him, he said to gasps. You can do that? Shiera asked. I've done it before, twice, he said, leaving out Doran as it was not something anyone needed to know. Go? Who? She asked. The Mountain. When I fought him, I'm guessing the Darkstar was the other, Oberyn asked. Guy he was. I wasn't going to make it in time, so it was just like with the Mountain. I must have tapped into something. Chase said. Though it was true for them and not so for Doran, you also told my aunt you'd never do it deliberately. Jaime said, his anger clear, though Jay wasn't sure if it was because of what he'd tried to do or what it had done to him. I also said I'd change my mind if it came to those I care about, if their lives were at risk. You all wish me to risk your lives to take this city. You don't think if there was a way to stop that, I'd take it? He asked, his voice raised. But you could not? Oberyn asked. No. Maybe I need to feel it more, the risk to be immediate. I don't know. But I couldn't, he said, not telling them that, for the first time ever, he had found no door to enter. Pity. Would have been nice not to have to walk into a city that may explode at any moment. Arthur said, catching them all out. Jay laughing as he looked to them all. "We should eat and make plans. It's going to be a long night," he said, and Jamie looked to him before sending a servant to ready some food. All through it, though Shiera sat with an odd look on her face, and were it not for the people in the tent, then he'd have spoken to her about it. As it was, he found he couldn't find the opportunity to bring it up. King's Landing, 298 AC. Sandor. Listening to strong Belwa's snore was preferable to some of the other sounds that usually came from the man's body. Sandor had never met a man who made so much noise voluntarily or involuntarily. Belches, farts, licking his lips and fingers when he ate, and now fucking snoring as they sat in the boat and rowed to shore. Around him, the men of the Company of the Rose seemed eager to land and meet the White Wolf. Sandor trying to remember what he could about Jon Snow or Jaehaerys Targaryen as he was now, and finding there wasn't much. He had thought, when next he set foot in Westeros, it would be to finally face off with his brother once and for all, though that vengeance had been denied to him and he still didn't know how he felt about it. When Melisandre had told him he'd been furious, that it was a Martell who killed him, didn't make it feel better either. True, they deserved Gregor's head as much as he did, but his brother was supposed to be his, not theirs. Over time, he'd come to accept it, cursed as the kinslayer people would say, and yet for years he'd watched as Gregor was anything but cursed. Whenever he met Oberyn Martell, he'd ask him for the details. Knowing the Red Viper's reputation, he expected that his brother had suffered, and Gregor deserved to suffer for all he'd done. Looking at the shore, he stiffened when he saw the men on horses, even more when he saw how many free horses there were. On the boat, there were less than 10 men on shore given the number of horses, thrice that. "Make ready," he heard Roderick Snow say, and then the fat fucker woke up. "Liver and onions," Belwas said to Chuckles. "Ask those men there if they have liver and onions for you. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to give you some, you sleepy fucker." Sandor said to laughs. "The three-headed dragon," Sir Davos said, drawing their attention to the sigils the men wore and the banner they held. "It seems the princess has met up with her nephew." "Aye, let's hope it was a friendly reunion," Sandor said warily. It took them almost an hour to reach the shore, and when they did, Sandor looked to the men, seeing one of them wearing a white cloak, and finding to his surprise, it was a man he'd recognized. Though this both confused and worried him, as Sir Richard Horpe had been serving a different king when Sandor had left to go to Essos, something he mentioned to Davos and was glad of the relief the man's response brought him. Sir Richard disappeared with the Princess Marcella. "Sandor, I reckon he found his way to the king," Davos said, and Sandor nodded. Still, when the boat hit the shore, his hand went to his sword just in case. If they intended to take him prisoner, he'd prove it a costly endeavor. He chuckled when Belwas's hand went to Isarok, too, the man winking at him and letting him know he had his back. Belwas may have been a fat, smelly fucker. He was a loyal one, though, and the man could fight.
"Sir Davos, his grace sent me to escort you to our camp."
"Princess Daenerys informed us where you may be landing," Sir Richard Horpe said. "The princess, is she safe?" Sandor asked. "Aye, Clegane she is. We've brought extra horses for you all." "Sir Davos, His Grace requests you join us. He's in need of the services only you can provide." "Aye, very well. Lead on, Sir Richard," Davos said. And soon enough they were riding from the beach. The boat pulled in and dragged onto the sand. Seeing the sheer size of the army ahead of them was mind-blowing. How Robert and Jon Arryn had ever thought they'd have a chance to beat them showed just how lost and foolish they truly were. Sandor looked to see the sigils of Northmen, Riverlanders, and men of the West, the three-headed dragon and the lords of the Narrow Sea, and finally the sun and spear of House Martell. He wondered if Oberyn would be here himself, and if he was, how it would feel upon seeing him. Trist, though quickly he shook it off when he saw the princess's dragon take off and fly, Dany sitting unharmed on its back. "Where's the princess going?" he asked, and Sir Richard shook his head. "His Grace doesn't tell me everything, Clegane." They were brought to the largest tent, and he, Belwas, Roderick, and Sir Davos were led inside. Sandor, happy to see Shiera sitting and looking unworried. Looking around the tent, he saw Jaime and Tyrion Lannister, Sir Richard Lonmouth, and Sir Arthur Dane, even he finding himself looking in awe at the famed knight. Besides Sir Arthur stood a giant of a man. He was wearing a white cloak too, and Sandor wondered who he was. Given his height, they could very well be related, he thought as he smirked. Sir Davos. Sandor, I'm afraid I don't know you, sir, the king said to Roderick. Roderick Snow, your grace, from the Company of the Rose, sent by Torhen Snow to protect the princess as per your request. You have my gratitude, Roderick, as does the company, the king said with a nod before looking to Belwas. Strong Belwas protects princess also, king, Belwas said, smiling. Then I'm sure she's been most protected, and you too have my gratitude. I'd ask you to sit, but I'm afraid we don't have much time. Sir Davos, my uncle tells me you were a smuggler by trade. How well do you know King's Landing? Bargers. Well enough, your grace. You intend to smuggle men into the city? Davos asked. I have a need to, sir. As many as I can. There's a cove near the cliffs. Do you know it? The king asked. I do. It's easy enough to navigate unless it's watched. If it is, then it's a death trap, your grace. It's not, and I can ensure it won't be, but I need someone to deliver us to it. Can I count on you, Sir Davos? Aye, you can, your grace. Why not just take the city? You have the men, dragons too, if what I was told is true, he asked gruffly. We do, Sandor. But they have wildfire, and any attack on the city will lead to them setting it off. The king said, his voice soft when he spoke next. I'd not risk those inside, no. This is the only way, I'm sorry to say. Wildfire? Fuck, he thought as he looked at the king, though he was glad at least that he had come up with a different plan. Soon, though, he began to glance nervously at the others as it dawned on him, the shiver running down his spine. One he couldn't ignore as he looked to the king and found him staring at him. You want us to join you in there, don't you? He said, and the king smiled sadly. I'll not ask anyone to come who doesn't wish it so, but I need men who can fight and who won't back down. With luck, we'll be able to secure each of the caches and hold them while we take the city. And if we're not lucky, he asked, staring at the boy, then we're fucked, the king said, and Sandor laughed, looking at him and nodding his head. You have my sword, your grace. Mine too, where my good friend goes, I go, Belwas said, and Sandor glared at the smiling face of the man beside him. Friend? He wasn't his friend, was he? Shiera joined them as they were taken to get some food, Davos staying to speak with the king, and Belwas sticking by him as if leaving him would leave the man unfed. She told them Dany had flown to get Grey Worm and that she too would be heading into the city, that once there she'd try to sway the Unsullied to their side, Sandor knowing it was pointless to try and talk any of them out of it. Strong Belwas will guard the princess, Belwas said, and before he got to say anything to him, the man smelt the food from the tent ahead of them and was gone so fast that Sandor felt the wind as he raced by him. This is fucking madness, heading into a city that could burn at any time. How could you let her agree to this? He said, his voice low so people couldn't hear them argue. When has anything I've ever said or done stopped Dany from doing what she wants? This will work, Sandor. She'll turn them. Now come eat. It's going to be a long night, and you won't get a chance to do so for some time. The attack on King's Landing, 28 AC. Jaime. He looked over the plans and shook his head. To say it was risky was to raise it to a level it didn't deserve. It was almost reckless, but he knew it had to be done, and that was why no matter what Jay said, nothing would stop him from going on this mission. Standing now on the beach, he looked around to the three groups of men who would be going, and were it anything but the possibility of wildfire being set off, he'd have found himself feeling extremely confident. Oberyn and his daughters, Sir Arthur, Sir Walder, Sir George, Sir Richard Horp, and Sir Richard Lonmouth, Sandor Clegane, Strong Belwas, Roderick Snow, and 2 more men of the Company of the Rose. The Great John and the Small John both refusing to be left behind, and Ned Stark, who despite Jay's arguments, and Mage despite his, both refused also. The Strongboy and his father were both far too keen to join in, and Randall Tarley refused to let the Reach not be represented. Lord Blackwood and Sir Patrick Mallister, then both saying the same for the Riverlands. Sir Roland Storm, who'd arrived alone without his brother or his men, stood there along with Lord Beric and Thoros of Myr, the only one of them with any knowledge of wildfire. Jay spoke to his aunt, who stood with 2 Unsullied, and who would, along with Strong Belwas, pretty much walk through the town. Then, once he was finished speaking to her, he moved to him and gave him a nod. Sir Davos had sent for 2 more boats, and even with 3, it was too tight a squeeze. Jaime watching as Jay reached out, and soon enough Rhaenys was landing beside him. "Beside him!" "I'll take my uncles and Sir Arthur on Rhaenys. We'll land unseen, and I'll have Rhaenys fly over the city. It'll, if anything, distract them some more," Jay said, and Jaime looked to him before moving over to wish him luck. Despite the situation, he found himself smirking at the uneasy look on Ned Stark's face as he was helped up onto the dragon's back. Arthur seemed well used to flying by now, and Oberyn just looking eager for the experience. The dragon was in the air well before they had set off, and though it was only 4 men less going by boat, it did make it more comfortable. Jaime, though not appreciating Thoros' jape that should the boat turn over, then all the men wearing armor would drown. Thankfully, the boat didn't even come close to turning over, and with as many strong men on it who were ready to row, they made quick time in arriving at the cove, finding Jay and the others waiting for them when they got there. They didn't bother to tie the boats off, instead sending them drifting in the water, much to Davos' chagrin. They couldn't risk them being found, though. And as Dany, Belwas, and the Unsullied walked up the steps and headed into the city, Jaime and the others followed Jay. When they reached the edge of the entrance into the tunnels, Sir Patrick moved to light a torch, Jay quickly slapping it from his hands. "There's wildfire ahead. Sir, the last thing you wish is an open flame," Jay said softly, though it was clear he was angered. "Forgive me, your grace, but how are we to find our way to the caches without light?" Lord Tydos asked. "Follow them," Jay said. And Jaime looked on as the cats came out from the tunnel, 7 of them all looking hungry and the worse for wear. "Your grace?" Randall Tarley said, looking confused. "Trust me, my lord, follow them and they'll lead you where you need to be. If they stop, then you stop," Jay said, and then he leaned in to pet each of the cats, whispering words to each, and making it look as if they were trained and not controlled, though he didn't fool the Northerners or Lord Blackwood, who stood smiling as he looked at the cats and the king. "Of course, your grace," Randall said. "My lords, my ladies, good sirs, what we're doing is most dangerous, and I wish there was another way. Truly I do, but if we stick to the plans we've agreed on, then we will succeed, and that I have no doubt. I thank each of you for playing your part in this. It both warms my heart to have you with me, and adds to my worry to think of any of you in danger. Be careful, take no unnecessary risks, and one day we'll all have an incredible story to tell. With luck, I'll see you all on the morrow, and then we can finally begin to fix the wrongs in this realm. I wish you all good fortune," Jay said, looking to him and seeming to want to say something but not being able to. "For House Targaryen and King Jaehaerys," he said softly as each of them nodded, words not spoken aloud, but each of them showing they'd have cheered if they could. As he watched each of them split up, he looked to his side. Sir Walder had his axe ready, and the Strongboy carried a mace, his great sword on his back, as he felt it useless in the tunnels. Roderick Snow carried a long sword, but it was a bow he held in his arms, and as Jaime looked, he saw what he felt was a very impatient cat. "Well, we had better follow the damn cat, then," the Strongboy said to Chuckles as they moved through the tunnels. The Great John. He was following a cat in the dark with no light through tunnels. He was following a damn cat of all things. Beside him, His son, Titus Blackwood, and Sir Richard Lonmouth seemed unperturbed that they were following a cat, and for the first time, the Great John wished he had one of the wolves beside him, even the silent one. Gods. Especially the silent one, he thought with a laugh. "What are you laughing at, father?" his son asked. "Just thinking, son, what I wouldn't give to have Ghost with us right now," he said, and even in the darkness, he could see his son smirk. "Aye, though with him here we wouldn't be needed. That fucker could clear all these tunnels on his own." That he could. "Sir," Richard said before suddenly he stopped, placing his hand on both their shoulders as he moved them against the wall. He heard it then, the footsteps ahead of him walking his way, and when Richard pointed to his knife, he smiled. There was no better feeling than swinging your great sword and taking an enemy down. Well, almost none, he thought, thinking of his wife. Though getting in close and taking a man out with a dagger, watching the life as it went from his eyes, was close enough. The Great John didn't revel in killing. It didn't excite him. Though he loved the thrill of battle, killing a man who wished you dead. Well, there was something righteous in that. Looking to Richard, they both moved quickly, the two gold cloaks not seeing them coming towards them in the darkened tunnel. Far too quickly it was over, his knife going straight through the man's eye and into his brain as Richard slit the other man's throat. "Drag them over here, there's a gap," Smallgen whispered, and they did as he said, the two bodies not quite fitting, but enough to hide them for now. "It's a pity we'd not more time," Richard said as they moved. "Why?" he asked curiously. "I changed the leader of the Gold Cloaks years ago. He's one of my men. In time, I'd have been able to bring them all to the king's side." "Just what exactly do you do for the king, Sir Richard?" Titus asked. "Whatever he asked me to," roared Titus. "Whatever he asked me to," Richard said, and the Great John smirked. They moved forward and soon came to a diverging path, the cat moving to the left. And as they followed him, the Great John shook his head. Wards he knew all about. He was from the north, after all. And it explained a lot about the wolves, too, but this was something different. To warg more than one animal, to control it in such a way, only someone blessed by the old gods could do such a thing, and he was glad to be on the same side of them once more. "There," he heard Titus say, and he looked. 2 men. That's all they'd put here, 2 men. "How good are you with that bow?" Richard asked his son, Great John looking on eagerly as the Small John lined up his shot. "Watch," the Small John said quietly. The arrow flew true, and within the blink of an eye, the second one was hitting home also, the 4 of them quickly moving to the 2 men on the ground, the Great John looking to see just how clean the aim had been. The gap between the armor and the helms was small, but his son had hit it perfectly. The men died before they hit the ground, and the slap he hit him on the back was one filled with pride. "So now what?" he said as he looked around the cavernous space. Jar upon jar of green liquid surrounding them, making him nervous. "Now we secure this and wait until the king sends for us. I hope he brought some ale," Richard said, and the Great John handed over his skin. It wasn't a lot, but it'd do as long as the wait wasn't too long. Ubara, she, her sisters, and Sir Richard Horp moved through the tunnels. Following a cat was nothing new to her. When they were young, her father would make them chase cats. Why, she had no idea at the time, and assumed he was just having fun at their expense. Later on, they went to Bravos, and she found the young water dancers doing the same, her father explaining that it helped with their reflexes. In her hand, she held her spear, the round shield in her other, while behind her, Tien carried a bow. The tips of the arrows were poisoned, and she could see Nims throwing knives whenever the little light that the tunnels allowed through caught the blades. Sir Richard Horp wielded his longsword and carried a dagger in his other hand, and whatever they would face, they were more than ready for. Soon, though she became bored, the tunnels feeling never-ending, and the light growing ever scarcer, her mind drifting as she wondered what her father and the others were doing. Had they completed their own missions already? Had they faced worthy foes? So lost was she in this thought that when the cat stopped, she did not, and only the whoosh of the arrow saved her from giving their presence away. "Pay attention, sister," Tyene said gently as she stepped forward and moved to the man on the ground. Our cousin said we were to watch the damn cat, Obara. Nim set her voice low but angry. She was furious with herself when they continued onward and eager to prove herself better than she had been. When the cat next stopped, she did also. When it moved, she moved. At one point, she thought it was playing with her, and yet knowing now it was not. When they reached the cavern, they found, to their dismay, no guards there at all. Obara glaring angrily around and finding just jar upon jar of wildfire. Yet something didn't feel right, and almost by instinct she turned. The cat's hiss low enough that only she heard it. The flaming arrow she blocked with her shield, and then she threw her spear and heard the pained shout. Sir Richard staying behind while she and her sisters moved out. Tyene's arrow flew true, and another man hit the ground before Nim threw her knives, and Obara heard the last man run away. Faster than either of her sisters, she chased him, uncoiling the whip from her hip as she did so, and seeing him turn the corner ahead of her. Moving even faster, she drew the whip back and aimed it, missing the first but not the second time. The sound of the man as he hit the ground was loud, and she worried that others would hear, but she needed to deal with him first before she could deal with anyone else. Pulling the whip toward her, she dragged the man along the ground, and soon she was leaning over him, Nim and Tyene coming to her side. "How many others are there here?" she asked, and the man shook his head. Obara looked to Nim, who picked out a small, thin blade and moved it to the man's eye. "My sister asked you a question. You'd best answer." Nim said, "None. The nearest of the others are far off, down the tunnel. There are some patrols, but I'm the last of our group." "That you are," she said as she drew her own blade across his throat. "We better hide these bodies," Tierney said. And soon enough, Obara was sitting in the cavern with the jars feeling bored once again. Loros. The group he was in was anything but talkative. Beric seemed focused, and Clegane was the same as he'd always been. Only Artos the Northman seemed willing to engage in conversation. Thoros found he needed it. The quiet bothered him, and walking in the darkened tunnels, the knowledge that the night was dark and full of terrors gave him plenty to ponder on. Wildfire was a dangerous substance, and the way he used it was much different from how he imagined they intended to use it here. He used his blood to control the flames, though lately he'd found he'd not needed to. Ever since he'd met the prince, things had been different, and he'd been training in Beric's yards when it had first happened. An accident which had made him even more of a believer than he had already been. The cut was his fault, and it was a foolish mistake. Yet when his blood had caught the blade, it had ignited it. For days he'd been sure he'd coated it and forgotten, and yet he'd felt the excitement too, even if it had been tempered with the idea that if he was wrong, then he'd end up questioning his faith some more. Still, he hadn't been able to let it go, and so he'd bought a new blade and rode out to the woods, cutting his hand and letting the blood flow the flames, appearing as soon as he did so. That combined with the visions and everything else was the final push he needed, and the prince would forever have his full support. The prayers he sent to R'hllor to let him live to see his chosen rise now filled his days and nights. He'd felt young again, vibrant and eager for each day, rather than waking up ready to get drunk. "Wait," Barry said, and they all stopped, the cat not moving in front of them. "Move!" 4 times on the way they'd stop, and the cat stopped and moved when it did, and now he saw them in front of him. 6 men, and no way to get to them, not without being seen. Roderick held a bow, and could take some of them out, but there were 2 near flames, and they not reach them both. As he looked to the others, he saw the cat move forward and hiss, 3 of the men moving towards it. "What the fuck are you doing?" one of the others said. "I'm fucking hungry. Have you never eaten cat stew?" one of the men said, laughing. Thoros watched as the cat ran past them down the corridor, and soon enough 3 men came running after it. His sword moved as fast as Beric's and Clegane's, finding the spot just under the man's chin and coming out the top of his head. Thoros grabbed the man before he hit the ground and laid him down gently. He saw both Beric and Clegane do the same, and then he moved to look at where the other men were. There was only one near a flame now, and the other two were leaning against the wall far from it. Giving Artos the nod, he, Clegane, and Beric ready to move, Thoros raising his hand and counting down from 3. When he reached 1, they were charging up the corridor, and an arrow whistled by his head. Raising his sword, he felt the blade catch his hand and looked down in horror as the flames took hold. He tried to stop himself, but felt himself falling forward, and as he heard the 2 men fall, he looked to see his sword crash into a jar of the green liquid and readied for the explosion of color and flames to come. It didn't, and though the wildfire spilled across the floor and onto his blade, the flame had gone out. "You bloody fool, you could have killed us all," Clegane said while Thoros looked to the blade in his hands. "I didn't set the fire, nor did I extinguish it," he said as he looked from Clegane back down to the blade. "Keep that fucker away from the damn fire for fuck's sake," Sandor said, moving away from him. Thoros just couldn't look at or see anything but the blade in his hands. It had been lighted by accident, but it was extinguished on purpose, and only one had the power to do that. R'hllor granted him his favor this day, which meant he had a role for him to play in the events to come. "Whatever you wish of me, my lord." "What?" he said, his voice unheard in the darkened cavern. "Dany." She, Grey Worm, Mosador, and Strong Belwas walked through the city unhindered, not one of the gold cloaks moving to stop them or ask them questions. People looked out from behind windows and stared at them as they walked by, Dany feeling their unhappiness at their presence, but none did more than just stare. She looked down at the map in her hand and followed it as best she could, relieved when she finally saw the 2 Unsullied standing outside the house. "We wish to speak to your commander," Dany said, and the Unsullied didn't respond. "Yoragon sighed. "Sure. Say Darilaros. Costagon enter. Stand aside so the princess may enter," Grey Worm said, his voice one used to giving commands to his own men, and the 2 Unsullied did as he asked without question. She was taken up the stairs and she found a room full of Unsullied, more than 10 men, not including the 2 downstairs, and one sitting with his back to them by the fire. "Se Darilaros, za ia, Juragon sit ause." "The princess has an offer for you and our men," Grey Worm said, and the man turned around. "This one has not seen you in a long time." "Black Ant," Grey Worm said, and the Unsullied shook his head. "Sewer Rat?" "You?" Grey Worm. "Sewer Rat, the man you serve. Your master. Does he have the whip?" Dany asked, and Sewer Rat nodded. "Grey Worm, tell him what we did with the whips that bound you." "Princess burned whips, freed Unsullied, freed Missandei of Neath," Grey Worm said, looking to each of the men. Dany noticed the eager looks they shot back at her and at Grey Worm, before finally all eyes in the room looked to Sewer Rat. "Not our whips," Sewer Rat said. "No, they were not. But the offer is the same. You saw the army outside, the dragons. You know what they want you to do with that liquid, what it will do if you set it ablaze. Master orders Unsullied follow," Sewer Rat said. "Maybe you need a new master, one you choose. Grey Worm, who do you follow?" "Duh," Dany said. "Princess Daenerys Stormborn." "Why?" she asked. "Because she gave us our freedom," Grey Worm said, and Dany looked to see the eyes of everyone in the room looking to them now. "I offer you and your Unsullied the same. Magister Illyrio will fall. Don't fall with him. Stay your hands and I'll bring you the whip before the night falls on the morrow." "Duh," Dany said. "We stand. For now. No whip, and then we follow orders," Sewer Rat said. "You'll tell the others?" she asked, and the man nodded. Dany took a seat and breathed out a huge sigh of relief. She'd known it would be difficult. The men of the Unsullied couldn't usually be reasoned with. They'd fight to the death if they were ordered to. So ingrained in them was the need to follow orders. It had been Grey Worm who brought up the whip, telling her they'd need the order from the one who carried it before they'd listen, so she had figured out a compromise and hoped it would be acceptable. Now, she just needed to get her hands on that whip. She only hoped her nephew could see it done. The wife. The killing was easy. Getting rid of a body was hard, especially one as large as the fat man was. Thankfully, the Red Keep seemed full of passages and secret entrances, and after finding one, she dragged the man to it before carefully removing his face. After saying her prayer to the God of many faces, she removed the servant's face and put on the magister's. Trying. Wearing someone's face was magic beyond her understanding. How she was able to become someone else so completely, something only those much closer to her God than she knew. But as she felt the largeness of her stomach and saw the roundness of her fingers, the waif closed the entrance and took her seat. When she heard the servant come to the door, she quickly realized her mistake, grabbing the plates of food and rushing to throw what was on them down on top of the fat man's body. She had just sat back down when the girl entered the room. That she never made eye contact with her or said a word showed her for the slave she was. But it also proved that just like with any other face she had ever worn, she was once again both no one and someone else. "Where is Aegon?" she asked, her voice not her own, as the Magister's words left her mouth. "I believe he's sleeping, Magister," the girl said. The waif said nothing, and waited until the girl left before standing up and readying the second part of her mission. It would be so easy to just go to the boy's room and slit his throat, but his life wasn't the many-faced god's to take, and to take a life not owed or not in service of their god was to put your own at risk. Some rules were not worth breaking, and what the faceless men did to those who hadn't learned that lesson, even she shuddered at the thoughts of it. Instead, with her guards, she readied to meet the other man. It was time to remove another obstacle from the prince's path. The ride to the buildings the Magister owned was fraught with danger, especially wearing this face. She was glad she didn't need to ride in a palanquin and wouldn't be putting extra strain on the poor men and women who served him. Though sitting in the carriage, she did feel sorry for the horses who had to pull the weight of the fat man. Reaching the building, she walked into the solar and found she didn't have to wait too long for the tattered prince to arrive. The look on the man's face enough to tell her that she wouldn't even need to send him away. No, instead it looked as if he was coming to tell her that he was ready to leave. "Burning people. My men are not monsters. We didn't sign up for that," the tattered prince said. "How else did you think I'd keep the dragons at bay?" "You may have, but for how long, and where the fuck did those other three come from?" "The boy's aunt. I had thought she was still in Essos. Well, she may not be, but I and my men soon will be. We're leaving. You can hold this damn city yourself." "You would leave without payment?" she asked, surprised, the Magister's voice sounding shocked. "We will leave tonight. When they come for you, Magister, you'd be wise to be elsewhere too, regardless of your plans." She looked as the tattered prince walked from the solar, leaning back in the chair. She waited until she was sure the man had gone and called for the carriage to take her back to the Red Keep, once again feeling the eyes of the residents of the city upon her as the carriage passed them by. The waif felt more in danger here in this carriage than she had in any single mission she had done for the Faceless Men. Sneaking into Mansis surrounded by countless guards, moving among palace guardsmen, had never made her feel nervous, and yet, until she reached the gates of the Red Keep, she was on edge. She didn't sleep that night. It was rare when she was on an assignment that she ever slept until the job was done, and this was no different. After calling for food to be brought to her early the next morning, she sat by the window and looked out on the city, the kindly man's words ringing in her ears as she sat facing the open window and felt the breeze on her true face. "Do your mission, then wait. If the prince is as we hope, then I'll see you again," the kindly man said. "And if he's not?" Belar Morgulis. When dawn broke, she put the face back on and said her prayer to her god, and then sighed when the food was brought. She was thankful she'd asked for it to be brought here. The thoughts of having to sit with people and actually having to eat it all turning her stomach, or the Magister's one, in this case she thought with a smirk. Once she'd thrown it on top of the body and tried not to look at the rats who weren't discriminating between the food or the man. She walked to meet with the false prince. "Ah, good, my lord, Hand is here. How soon can we expect to see my bastard brother kneel?" Aegon said as she looked at him. "We'll ride out to him at noon, your grace. Give him another show if it's necessary." "Good. I think I'd enjoy another show," Aegon said, smiling, and the waif nodded. She looked around the room. There were very few guards and only one man who may cause a problem. She soon found herself wondering how long she'd have to wait and whether or not today was her day to die. Ned. Every so often as they walked through the tunnels, Jaehaerys would stop, Ned looking to the cat which led the way, only to see it wasn't that which had grabbed his nephew's attention. Instead, he assumed it was the others, and just the thoughts that 7 cats were being controlled by his nephew at the same time boggled his mind. He had slipped inside Lia's mind occasionally, certainly not as much as Robb had Grey Winds, or as he imagined the rest of his children had with their wolves. For Jaehaerys it seemed to be second nature, and he began to wonder about what Howland had told him when he'd explained some of the powers his nephew possessed. Jojen is a green seer, Ned as am I, but we're candles compared to the inferno that Jon is. Mere flickers to the flame, such is his power compared to our own. As he grows, and the more he uses it, the more he learns about it, what he'll be able to do with it will be unlike anything even I can imagine. It must be learned, though, for the enemies he will have to face can only be defeated once Jon fully understands his own power. It scares me, terrifies me, Howland. Even when I try it with Leah, I feel I lose a part of myself. Each time we slip into an animal, Ned, we gain a part of them, and them, us, for you, for your children, for Jojen. This is more than true. But for Jon, it's different. He's bonded to a wolf and a dragon, Ned. And as long as he is, then there'll always be a balance. Fire and ice. And what of us? He asked. You are Starks and were born to be wolves. They are who you are bonded to, and though you gain a part of them, you'll never become them, and truly is being part wolf a bad thing. He had to admit it was not. They seemed to have stopped for good now. Jaehaerys leaning against the wall and Oberyn sitting down beside him, Arthur standing watching just in case, and as he looked to him, Ned could see his nephew's eyes were closed once again. It took him some time to open them, and the smile on Jaehaerys' face was blinding even in the dim light of the tunnel. They've done it, Jaime, Obara, Tarly, Sandor, Richard, and Mage. They've taken the wildfire. Dany is sitting with the Unsullied. They're not doing anything and seem friendly. She's not their prisoner, so I assume she's brought them on side, Jaehaerys said. My daughters? Oberyn asked. Are unharmed, uncle, as if everyone else. Lord Tarly took a slight wound, and Sir Davos a knock to the head, but no one was hurt seriously, and no one was lost, Jay said, relieved. Oh, thank the gods. He said and saw his nephew nod. Thank the gods indeed, uncle. So we go? Arthur asked as Jay pulled out his sword. We go. The move down a corridor and came to a ladder. Sir Arthur going first, and Oberyn insisting that he guarded their nephew's back. Once they reached the top, they entered a large room, and he saw Jaehaerys and the others looking around. The 3-headed dragon was everywhere. On the walls, on the floor, it was painted, burned into the walls. There were small, shiny stones making it out, and a mosaic on the floor. In front of them, a flight of stairs seemed to lead up to the ceiling above them. The chamber of the dragon mosaic. Are we under the Tower of the Hand? Arthur asked, and Jay shook his head. Not the tower. No, we're under the throne room itself, Jaehaerys said. Go? I've never. Arthur said, dumbfounded. Balerion showed me. His nephew said, smiling, I need to find Aegon. Ned watched as he closed his eyes, the look on his face one of concentration, and when he opened them, he seemed even happier. He's above him, Illyrio, and 4 guards. Uncle, there's one near the door furthest away from the throne. Can you reach him with your spear? Easily, nephew, Oberyn said. Arthur, you and Uncle Ned take the other 3. I'll deal with Illyrio and Aegon. As you command, my king, Arthur said. With any luck, this will be over with soon, on 3. Jaehaerys said as he moved up the stairs. 1, 2, 3. The light hitting them temporarily blinded him, and he was still readjusting when the slash of the sword came at him. He blocked it instinctively and found himself being pushed back. A flash of orange passed by him and almost distracted him, and then his sword was on the ground, and he was on his knees. The white blade was all he saw. As the man fell and as he was helped up, he looked around the room. Oberyn was pulling his spear from a man's chest, and on the ground, near him, 2 men lay dead. A small girl leaned over a man with her knees on his chest, and Jaehaerys was in the middle of the room, his sword clashing with the one held in the mummer's hands. Were he not so worried about his nephew, he'd have noticed the blade the other boy held. Dark Sister facing off against Blackfyre for the first time in who knew how many years. The other boy was talented and had clearly spent hours training with the blade, but his nephew was way beyond him. Just listening to the sound of the swords as they hit together was like nothing he'd ever heard before. Valyrian steel on Valyrian steel here in the throne room of a keep, built on the orders of the first Valyrian king. The sound of Blackfyre falling to the ground and the smack of a hilt on metal took him from his admirations. Ned, looking to see the silver-haired boy, was on the ground, his mask knocked from his face, and the full nature of his burns was clear for all to see. It's over, Aegon. It's done, Jaehaerys said. It's not done. I'll burn you. I'll burn you all. Aegon shouted, and then the sound of the glass breaking and the spark as the dagger hit the ground had Ned screaming out loudly. The green fire moved towards his nephew, and he watched as it soon swept over him, Aegon laughing like a madman as he lay on the ground. Ned looked on in horror. The armor was burning under the fire, and were it not for Arthur and Oberyn dragging him away, then he'd be burning too. Was this how he felt? How Brandon had felt when he watched their father burn. Was this why he strangled himself trying to get to the sword? He looked to see Aegon laughing with a look of madness in his eyes. The image of a mad king looking on while his family burned one he'd only ever seen in his dreams before. Look, he heard Oberyn say, and he turned to see the girl moving to Aegon, only to find that's not what Oberyn wished him to see. No, look. Through the fire he saw his nephew's hand move and something fall to the ground, the dripping suggesting it was blood, and then he watched as the fire began to go out, the green flames dying and a helm being thrown to the ground. A dragon doesn't fear the fire. A dragon is the fire, Jaehaerys said as he moved toward Aegon. The boot he gave him, knocking the false king out.